Good evening, or good afternoon. Welcome to the board meeting of October 23rd, 2019. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call, please?
On the attendance roll call, Student Director Garabio. Bow. Student Director Smith-Dahl. Okay. Director Hinton Hodge. Director Harris. Director Yee. Director Gonzalez. Director Torres. Vice President London.
Here.
President Ng.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. The board will now recess into closed session. We will take up the items that are listed in the agenda. We will reconvene for public session at 5:30. Thank you very much. The board is now in recess. Good evening. Thank you for coming. We're going to get this meeting started. If you could have a seat. Want to thank everyone for coming this afternoon. Before we begin, I do want to say a few words about any attempted disruption of tonight's meeting. Oh, excuse me. Mr. Rakestraw, before we begin, we do have to have a second roll call. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, the two student directors are absent. Director Hinton Hodge.
President.
Okay. Director Harris. Here. Director Yee.
Here.
Director Gonzalez. Not here. Director Torres.
Present.
Vice President London. Here. President Ng.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. So before we begin, I would like to say a few words regarding any attempted disruption of tonight's meeting. As you know, our meeting on September 25th was completely disrupted, and our meeting on October 10th was forced to resume in the committee room upstairs because of similar disruption. And there was also a joint meeting on Monday with members of the City Council that was disrupted. Additionally, news reports, online media posts, and other documentation and statements made in public indicate a clear intent to fully and completely disrupt tonight's board meeting. Therefore, any disruption will result in the board immediately resuming the board meeting upstairs in the committee room, as we did in the last meeting in accordance with the Brown Act. If that occurs, the meeting will be broadcast on the video screens, and public comment will be allowed from this room and broadcast upstairs. Please note that the usual public comment rules do apply. And while we hope this isn't necessary tonight, continued disruption in this room may leave us with no choice but to cancel public comment either for specific items or for the entire meeting in accordance with the Brown Act. The board does respect the will of our community to vehemently disagree with decisions that the board makes. This is a cornerstone of our democracy. It is critical to the success of any local government. But it is also the case that no district can function without at a basic level without board meetings. And while our board has been able to operate at a basic level with some disruption and interruption and is open to continuing to do so, we cannot operate with constant and complete disruption. The public needs to understand the impact of such constant and complete disruption. Every contract, every grant, almost all facilities issues, agreements with the city and other local partners, important policies, teacher permits and credentials, and so many more important issues go to the board in order to take effect and impact our schools directly. By making sure that our board meetings take place, we are not silencing anyone. As always, there is ample room for public comment. By making sure that our board meetings take place, we are simply doing what needs to be done in order for facilities to be built and maintained, students to have the supports that they need to succeed, and employees have the proper permits and credentials to serve our students. If the board resumes the meeting upstairs, only staff and media will be allowed to be present. Any member of the media who wishes to be present will need to line up at the double doors over here. They will be admitted one at a time. Only verified members of the media will be allowed upstairs. And lastly, please note that you can access the bathrooms through the doors in the back. I understand that there was issues of it getting locked early at the last meeting. We have addressed that issue. The bathroom will be open for the remainder of the meeting. In terms of public comment rules, Just would like to remind everybody that our board meeting is broadcasting live online. This means that our meetings and anything captured on video will be archived online and will be online forever. Second, given the high number of people who are here tonight and likely wanting to speak, we are going to limit the time to 1 minute per speaker so that we can hear from as many speakers as possible. If you are still speaking when your time is up, you will be allowed to finish your sentence. And our bylaws are so that your minutes cannot be transferred or combined. Third, we understand that there are really important issues that many people feel very passionate about. In order to be fair to all speakers and so we can hear as many speakers as possible, I will ask you to stop once your time has elapsed. Additionally, please keep your comments relevant to the items being discussed at the time. Please note that for a comment for a specific item, if I need to turn off the speaker first, please keep your comments relevant to the topic at hand. So if there's more than 3 people that are talking off topic and we need to shut off your mic because you're speaking off topic, we will stop public comment on that item. Fourth, the board does not respond directly to comments or questions made during public comment, as doing so could constitute a violation of the Brown Act. Board members, the superintendent, and staff do take notes and may follow up with the speaker after the meeting. Lastly, I do want to remind speakers that there are children in the audience, or they also might be listening or watching at home, so please keep that in mind as you speak.
We have guns here.
So we are at item C, which is at page 3. I'd like to report that there was no reportable action taken in closed session today. We are moving on to the review of oath of office, which is printed on page 6. There's also meeting norms listed for the Board of Education. Today, we don't have any special orders of the day, so I will ask the board if there are any modifications to the agenda. Seeing
If the
no...
board has none, I have one item that's requested to be withdrawn from today's agenda. That's the item on the adult education graduation requirements. That item is still not correct. The adult education department has to make some revisions, and that is item P.-39 or item 19-1917 on today's agenda. And we expect to bring it back on the first meeting in November.
Okay. Item P.-39 is postponed till November. Any other items? All right. Seeing none, we will move on to the report section. Our student board members are absent tonight, so we will not have a report from them tonight. For the president's report, I just wanted to announce that I will be on personal leave starting November 1st for the remainder of the year. Vice President, thank you. I'm sure that you will enjoy the board meetings the rest of the year with Vice President Jody London will be acting board president while I am away and will chair the remainder of the board meetings. There will be, there will be a board work plan that was approved. There will be board work plan updates that will happen during the president's report. And so stay tuned, but I did just want to make that announcement in terms of board leadership, acting board leadership transition for the remainder of the year. So with that, we will move on to the superintendent's report. I will turn it over to Superintendent Kyla Johnson-Trammell to give her report before we move on to the collective bargaining units.
Thank you. Good evening, public. Good evening, board. I simply want to announce that last board meeting, my work plan was approved by the board, and the details of the work plan are included in this presentation for everyone to read. It takes into account the feedback from the board to have more concise strategies, metrics, and goals. So please take a look at the work plan so that you can see the priorities for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson-Trammell. We are now on item N, which is a comment by collective bargaining units. If there are, I believe that we have Ms. Chaz Garcia, the second vice president here, yes, who will be here providing an update up to 5 minutes. President Keith Brown is unavailable tonight. Thank you. Ms. Garcia.
Good evening. I'm Chaz Garcia, the second vice president of OEA, and I wanted to address some concerns as we return from a difficult year last year and have heard a lot of talk about coming together and making plans to move forward and mend some fractures and get input from teachers and community. It is very disheartening to walk in this room for the second time and see the school police and SSOs being pitted against community members and to have a wall erected in a sanctuary district that purports to be a district that is supportive of community. Rather than building bridges, we are creating greater divides by these actions, and I'm wondering and asking the board, what are you going to do to mend the further damage that is being created and the hostility that is created through these actions that aren't even involving details around the school closures, but just the way you're coming to community? Because you have people here from different walks of life for different reasons who have issues with walls, who have issues with police. And myself walking in, being confronted, and I know the SSOs in the district, but it's not a comfortable feeling. It's not a greeting. It's not a welcoming to which would bring more community members to engage with you. So I'm asking, how will you move forward and move differently? Because currently, the way that we're moving as a district is creating further divides and further damage to all units, to all bargaining units, and to community members. So I'm hoping that there'll be some conversations and some working into the community and engagement with folks, real engagement, not a call for engagement that doesn't really bring people together in an authentic way to do something different. Because in 25 years, in all the school board meetings I've been to and some of the most atrocious things I've seen, this is extremely disturbing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Are there any other leadership members of any other unions here to speak on this item? Any other labor partners? All right. Seeing none, we will move on to public comments for all of the items A through N. Are there public comments for the items listed A through N, first from the board and then also from the public? Any comments from any of the reports or items listed so far? Seeing none. From the, I'm talking about the board first, and then public comments by the public, yeah.
Yes, Madam President, we have 5 speakers. Mike Hutchinson, Asada Olabala, Michael Lowton, Jim Mordecai, Stacy Gordon.
Hold on, Mr. Mordecai. Or can you keep talking so that they can...
So, second board meeting where...
The mic's going to get adjusted. Okay.
This is the
Can you
second
reset it to 1 minute?
school
Thank you.
board meeting that the president has referenced the Brown Act. And let's be clear that the Brown Act does not stop this board from answering in a brief manner comments and questions from the audience. This is a choice by this particular majority school board not to respond to public comment. So that is totally a distraction from the truth. So that's the truth. Now, also the truth is that most presidents of school boards talk, but they don't walk the walk. But one of the biggest problems in this district is enrollment. And we can say in Oakland that we have a president of the school board that is not just talking about enrollment, but is creating the opportunity for greater enrollment in the future of Oakland schools.
Thank you, Mr. Mordecai.
Mike Hutchinson. To follow up on Mr. Mordecai's comments, it's also very clear what the Brown Act was written to do. It was to guarantee open meetings for the community. And so at the last meeting, this microphone was unplugged. It took me demanding that the chief plug it back in to have any public comments at all. And you can smirk all you want, but you were announcing upstairs where nobody was allowed that the microphone was unplugged when we were standing here and it was plugged in. And you denied public comment, including on your work plan. That was an illegal vote. I'd signed up. So now let's look what you've done today. On top of having police officers here, and again, not only are we a sanctuary city, we're the home of the Panthers, and I am strictly opposed to there being police officers here to police the community at our meeting. And lastly, I can ignore the fact that there was nothing given in those reports, and that was supposed to be your 2 meetings worth report, Superintendent. But to have a barricade where the podium to speak is inside the barricade, this sends a clear message to us what you think of us and what you think of our
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Is the mic off?
Love life. I just want to let you know I'm having anxiety right now. I grew up under Jim Crow. I grew up on the bus. I had to sit behind a barrier. I could not move beyond that barrier. This is what this feels like. I'm being barricaded because of whatever reason, and I don't have the opportunity to fully participate freely. So thank you for the anxiety tonight. Inconsistency. You got them water bottles up here, but we were told, and I've seen you up here eating and drinking all the time. Not tonight. Nobody can eat and drink in here. I have to go to the bathroom outside, unescorted. When it gets dark, I hope nothing happens to me. Now I want to go to this thing. This plan. What made you think it was appropriate to put the mayor and David Silver on here? Those 2 corrupted individuals under Oakland Promise. Of all the pictures that you could put in your documents,
your time is
why
up.
did you choose to put the mayor and David Silver?
Thank you.
So, Mike Loudon, concerned parent, we learned at the last LCAP PSAC meeting that 83%, I think it's somewhere between 83 and 85% of the Oakland, the OUSD Police Department's budget comes out of LCAP spending. So what's represented here tonight is not being spent on speech therapists, reading intervention. This, we see your priorities here. It's very clear. Please take the guns out of the room. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I am Stracy, an OUSD parent, and I am speaking on behalf of Oakland Not For Sale, which is a coalition of parents, teachers, students, and community members with the following demands. Scrap the failed blueprint process and declare a moratorium on all school closures and consolidations until summer 2022. Close the school-to-prison pipeline. Do not fund the new $75 million Alameda County probation camp, where 40% of students are from Oakland, and instead of fully funded Oakland traditional public schools. Fight back against the charter school takeover by reversing Board Policy 6006. That will turn OUSD into a portfolio district and hand the rest of our traditional public schools over to charter school management companies. Let the people see the money by involving the people of Oakland in reforming and making decisions around OUSD finances. We will continue to disrupt these meetings, and there will be no more business as usual until these demands are met. No school closures.
Thank you.
Oakland is not for sale.
Thank you. Our attempt to physically disrupt the meeting and the safety of board members and staff cannot be guaranteed We have no choice but to move the meeting upstairs. We understand that the mic has been damaged by protesters, and so no public comment can occur until it is safe to examine it and it can be repaired and restored. Again, any member of the media who wishes to be present, please line up at the double doors downstairs to the left of the stage. You will be admitted one at a time. Only verified members of the media will be allowed upstairs. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a third roll call, please?
Yes, on roll call to establish quorum. The two student directors are absent. Director Hinton Hodge?
Yes, President.
Director Harris?
Here.
Director Yee?
Yes.
Director Gonzalez?
Here.
Director Torres?
Yes, President.
Vice President London?
Here.
And President Ng?
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. Since we are unable to do any more public comment at this time, we are now moving on to P, which is the adoption of the general consent report. Is there a motion to approve the general consent report?
Minus the item
Minus the item
postponed.
that has already been postponed.
I will move adoption. Second.
Moved by Director Gonzalez, seconded by Vice President London. This is minus P.-39. Is there any questions or comments from the board on the general consent agenda? Seeing none, unfortunately, we are unable to do public comment at this time because the mic has been unplugged downstairs. So we are unable to take public comment on this time, on the general consent report. So we will move on to voting on this item. Mr. Rakestraw, could we have a roll call, please?
Director Hinton Hodge? Not?
Yes.
You said yes?
Yes, she's
Okay.
here.
Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Gonzalez?
Yes.
Director Yee?
Yes.
Director Torres?
Yes.
Vice President London?
Yes.
And President Ng?
Yes.
The general consent report is adopted.
Thank you. We will now move on to unfinished business. We have some items that are coming to us from the Facilities Committee, so I will turn it over to the chairperson of the Facilities Committee, Vice President Jody London, to introduce these items.
Sorry, I need to turn on my microphone. So the Facilities Committee, I'm sorry, I'm looking for this item in the agenda. S1, thank you. Oh, okay. So the Facilities Committee at its last meeting unanimously moved forward both S1 and S2. And I think I can talk about them as the items come up, but I would like the body to know that these were unanimously approved by the Facilities Committee, and I'll give more detail as we get to each item. You want to take S1 right now?
Yes. Is there a motion to adopt item S.-1?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Director Yee and seconded by Director Gonzalez. Turn it over to Chairperson London again to discuss this item.
Great. So this, colleagues, we have had discussion in our prior meetings about our interest and intention to move forward with a renewal of our general obligation bond next year. Earlier this year, we approved a contract for polling services. And when you go out to do a poll, it's also very helpful to have a campaign consultant advising the pollsters on the different issues that will come up and that they may want to be polling about. The reason that we do this is that we incur costs when we go out to the public with an election, and we want to make sure that we're going to be able to win the bond. So this is for planning work. At the point that we move to put a bond on the ballot in 2020, then we would not be as involved in this, and there would be a campaign committee that would work on it. But for right now, what we have before us is a contract with Tramitola LLC to provide these bond consulting services. And this contract was competitively bid. The bid amounts that came in were very comparable, and it was the recommendation of staff that we go with this firm, which has worked with the district over many, many years. It was unanimously brought forward by the Facilities Committee, and it's already been moved and seconded, so it's open for discussion.
Are there any questions by board members? This contract was on the agenda for the last meeting. As you'll remember, we referred the contract to the Facilities Committee to have them weigh in and agreed that it would come back to the full board. Questions by board members on this item?
I just have a comment. That was what Director London said about a committee not being formed. So just want to acknowledge that was something that people have begun to do that, and that was kind of out of sequence. So I just want to be sure that that is kind of cease and desist in terms of a committee being formed without like the appropriate kind of advisement and sequencing of timing.
Thank you, Director Hinton Hodge. I'm not. I mean, the committee operates independent of the board, so I don't know that the board can tell an independent committee to meet or not meet. But I hear your concern.
Oh, is that right? Is that right? So a committee for a bond that we are in the initial process of bringing in posters and all that. So Director Gonzalez and everybody else can kind of just create a committee and use staff as well? I didn't realize that. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Other comments by board members?
I just had a question.
Director Harris.
Was the committee able to address some of the questions that were asked in terms of like the scope of work that the firm would take on? Do you have a clear sense of what they're going to do? And
yes, we do. There was attached, and I believe it's attached to this agenda as well. The scope of services it should be included, and we have that. Definitely, it was posted at the Facilities Committee agenda for last Friday.
But all the concerns that were addressed by committee members last time, where you feel comfortable going forward?
Yes, and if you look at the attachment, I'm looking in particular at pages 20 and 21 of their attachment. They're going to assist with ballot measure preparation, helping us early voter engagement, thinking about who are the voters we would want to be looking at. And they would give us a management plan and a timeline. They provided multiple references. As we noted, the fees were comparable with other firms that responded.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments before we vote on the item? Mr. Rakestraw, we're ready for a roll call since we can't have public comment on this item.
Okay, on the roll call to adopt the Trumbull contract. Director Hinton Hodge?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Director Yee?
Yes.
Director Torres?
Yes.
Director Gonzalez?
Yes.
Director Harris?
Yes.
Vice President London?
Yes.
President Ng?
Yes.
The motion is adopted.
Thank you. We are on to S2. This item also was discussed briefly at the Facilities Committee meeting.
We just need mics off. There's like 5 on right now. Thanks, guys.
Is there a motion to adopt item S.-2? This is a contract for services amendment with MK Think.
I will move adoption.
Moved by Vice President London. Is there a second? Seconded by Director Yee. I will turn this back over to Vice President London, who chairs the Facility Committee, to provide a high-level overview of the committee discussion.
Great. Thank you, President Ng. So this amendment would, we have engaged MK Think previously to consolidate a number of different documents and initiatives that have been put together previously so that we can come up with one facilities master plan. This would also inform not only a bond campaign we might do next year, but the state is potentially going to be putting a bond on the March ballot of 2020, and we need to have an updated facilities master plan in order to even be eligible for those funds. So we do have a pretty keen interest in having an updated facilities master plan. they have gotten into the work, they have identified a number of additional areas where MK Think services could help, are needed to really pull together the facilities master plan. So this is an amendment to do that. If you look on page 5 of 38 in the attachment, you will see the detailed scope of services that would be provided.
Director Gonzalez.
Thanks. I have a question about, I see that the contract has been edited so that the language has been modified so that there is the less of an emphasis on the community engagement piece of the work. And so my question to you, Mr. Nakatagawa, is how much engagement can we reasonably expect, and how do you anticipate the engagement for the master facility plan being accomplished?
Good evening. Formatting documents, developing language to help voters or help the citizens understand the needs of the district and how we're prioritizing that.
Okay, I have a question though, because the original contract, before we started modifying it, actually included language about community engagement. So there was obviously some plan on MK Think's part to provide some sort of community engagement. Now it sounds as though, even though we're increasing the contract, they're actually not going to be in person doing any community engagement. So I just want to understand that.
Yeah, so
before proceeding, would you please turn on the mic?
Oh, sorry. Either red or off. Is red on? Good. Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay. So previously, the amendment that was proposed originally included both community engagement and the portions of work that are in the current amendment.
Right, I'm referring to the original contract. Before
Right.
we made any changes, actually had language that
Right.
MK Think would be supporting community
and
engagement.
at that time, what MK Think had been told in terms of the engagement was that they would be coordinating engagement with the other actions that the district was taking in regards to the citywide plan and blueprint, and that they would be able to piggyback onto those engagements. And since that didn't happen, that's why we need a standalone amendment.
Okay, thank you.
I had a quick follow-up question to that. So if board members were wanting to host their own engagements, would MK Think, in working in consultation with district staff, be able to help support the informational documents that would be needed to be able to facilitate discussion?
Yes, that's the intent of the amendment, yes.
Okay. So we could still, if the outreach and that portion is to be held by district staff and or board members, but the information and data will be provided by the firm?
Yes.
Okay. Vice President London.
If I may, there was concern on the part of the committee that MK Think we were going to be spending quite a bit of money on an additional contract that would duplicate capacity that we think we have in-house. So that was why we asked them to revise the scope and the budget. The majority of these funds, I should note, are really for the work related to the facilities master plan update.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Director Yee.
And just to note that this was one of the recommendations in the grand jury report, that the district have an updated facilities master plan.
Great. If there's no further comments on this, I am going to see if we are in a position to. Yeah, please, Director Harris.
So by adopting this, we expect the completion of the work in full in March?
I believe that's correct. Mr. Nakatagawa, is that correct, that the work would be completed in March? We had originally expected December, so.
Yeah, We still intend at this point to have a first draft available in December, and then with the allowance for community input, we would then have a final version in March.
Okay, so ahead of any consideration for cohort 3, we will at least have a draft of this document.
Yes.
Okay, in December. Okay, thank you.
At this time, we're going to have a brief pause to see if we have been able to rehook up the podium downstairs to be able to take public comment. So we're just going to have a 2-minute recess as we test the mic downstairs.
Okay, we're ready.
We're ready to reconvene from that short recess. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have another roll call, please?
Yes, on the roll call to establish quorum. Director Harris? Here. Director Hinton Hodge?
Yes.
Director Yee?
Yes.
Director Gonzalez?
Here.
Director Torres? Vice President London?
Here.
President Ng?
Here.
All board members present, except student directors. We have a quorum.
Thank you. So we are on item S.-2. I do understand that the podium has now been hooked up again, and we are in a position to be able to take public comment on this item. If you are interested in taking public comment on this item, please line up at the podium, and we will take public comments at this time. We will allow for 1 minute, and then we will have to move on to the next speaker. So public comment on item S.-2. I'm not sure if I'm able to be heard downstairs, but if you are here to speak on item S.-2, this is the time that you can provide public comment. If you're here to speak on item S.-2, if you could please line up at the podium right now. If you can hear me, you will have 1 minute to speak on this item. So we are unsure if we can be heard downstairs, if somebody can raise their hand, if they're able to hear us, if one of the SSOs or officers could raise their hand to confirm that they can hear us, that would be great. Okay, it looks like we can be heard. So if there is, okay, are you here to speak on item S.-2?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. This is for item S.-2. We will provide 1 minute.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, all right. Oh wait, the video went out. Okay, all right. So my name is Tracy Gordon. I'm a OUSD parent. I have 2 children in Oakland Public Schools, and I just want to say I'm very disappointed in the board, the way you had all of these police officers pushing down our teachers, knocking down our parents. 3 of our parents got arresting our parents. I was almost maced in the face.
This
Billy
is for
Club. Yeah, it's about item whatever you just said. But it's not okay what you're doing. You are abusing our.
So at this time, we're just taking comments for item S.-2. We ask that the public speaks to this item. And if you're not in a position to speak on this item, we will, as stated earlier in the meeting, we will not allow you to speak further. All right, next speaker, please. Go ahead, Mr. Mordecai.
Jim Mordecai, speaking as an individual, and I want to talk on the item that's before us, which is a consultant contract, and it's a previous contract built on it, so it's a total of $422,950. Thousands of dollars. What for? Maybe it's a good thing. In fact, it is a good thing. It's a facilities master plan. You haven't had a board-approved facilities master plan since 2012. Great idea. But how are you paying for it? You're paying for it with the Fund 21, Measure J, construction bond money from the Oakland citizenships that are paying on their property. Bond money you're spending for an operational thing. You can make you
Thank
can
you,
use
Mr.
your
Mordecai.
staff to make
Your time is up. Is there? Can we confirm there's a timer downstairs that they can see? Okay, next speaker, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
They're breaking the
Go ahead.
My name is Megan Bumpus, and I'm a 5th grade teacher at Reach Academy. I would have very much liked to go upstairs and speak on some of the items on the agenda, but when I knocked on the door over there, eventually got John Sasaki, OUSD representative, and I said, President Eng said we district staff and media may go upstairs and participate in the meeting. I got my school ID right here, okay, but he came back after a few minutes and said—
Did you want to speak towards the item?
Yes, I wanted to speak towards the item. We came here to participate because we care about our schools and our kids. I am 5 feet tall, and they would not let me through the door to go upstairs and participate in this meeting. That is ridiculous. Okay, you have been violating the Brown Act meeting after meeting. People are here because we care. We didn't come to hurt anyone. Y'all have been hurting people week after week, month after month, robbing our schools of funds that our students deserve.
Thank you. Your time is now elapsed.
Life. Is this on?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm objecting to this item because you're using Measure J money for this item, and it's consistent with what you've done with item P12, where you use Measure J money as well for electric services outlets at 1000 Broadway. Measure J clearly states that you can only use that money for school facilities. 1000 Broadway, and this item has nothing to do with school facilities money. So I don't know if we've been able to speak to P12 yet, but you cannot spend over $500,000 on electric outlets on a building that's not a school facility. That's inappropriate. You have another item that's coming up that speaks to you have been consistently misusing Measure J money. And you have intentions of going to the voters to ask for more money. You're not going to get it if you're misusing funds.
Thank you. Your time is now elapsed. Next speaker.
Mike Hutchinson. First, shame on you for calling OPD on your own community. And on a personal level, I'll never forget that you called OPD on me. Now, before we're discussing S2, why don't we go back to S1? Because obviously, we can have public comment. So your vote that you just took on any previous items where you disallowed any public comment were illegal under the Brown Act.
Do you want to speak on this item? Because your time's going to go quickly.
Wait, I can't hear you. So if you're trying to talk to me during my time, we can't hear you down here. So just like last week's meeting, the first half of the meeting with no public comment, those were illegal votes. Now, in terms of this for the master's facilities list, why do you have a 7-Eleven committee going now that's deciding which properties to surplus when you haven't even done a master's facilities list to know what properties you have? This is the dysfunction, the failure by design that you're engaged in. You have already voted to close schools, but you haven't even done a master's facilities list yet.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Your time is now elapsed. Is there another speaker behind you? If so, please line up now. Thank you. All right. If you would like to speak, you would speak right now.
I'll make a comment when it's a good time to. So I don't know about this thing on here. I'm curious about elected officials who are scared of their constituents, who are teachers and children and parents, and who are so afraid of them that they hide instead of engaging in conversation, and who are so afraid that they hire police, who then, some of whom are good people, and some, no, I'm not speaking.
So we're on the item
so
S.-2.
But we're the people, and you're having your meeting without the people. And that doesn't make any sense. You're voting on things without hearing us. And what we're saying is that you're not listening to us.
If you would like to speak to this item, now is the time to do so.
You sound like a robot. We're talking about children, and you're talking to me like a robot. I'm a human being, and I'm telling you, I am so unhappy. And you all keep on not.
All right, is there any other speakers to speak on the amendment number 1 for the contract for services for MK Think, the facilities master plan? If not, we will move on to roll call.
On the roll call to adopt item S.-2, Director Hinton Hodge.
Yes.
Director Harris. Yes. Director Yee.
Yes.
Director Gonzalez.
Yes.
Director Torres.
Yes.
Vice President London.
Yes.
President Ng.
Yes.
The motion's adopted.
Thank you. We are now at item S.-3. This is a redrawing of Kaiser attendance boundary. This is the second reading and adoption for this item. We have Ms. Sonali Mararka here to answer any questions. Did you also have any high-level comments to provide in the beginning? Great. If you could introduce yourself, and we're going to take we have to take make sure that there's a motion on the floor. Is there a motion to adopt item S.-3?
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved by Director Yee, seconded by Vice President London. Ms. Marka.
Thank you, President Ng. Sonali Mararka, Executive Director of the Office of Enrollment. This is the second reading and vote of the redrawn boundary for Kaiser Elementary, the Kaiser Elementary attendance area. Based on the feedback we've received from families and from board members at the first reading, we've made some changes to the proposal. The feedback we received emphasized 2 areas. First, we heard concerns about the distance and potentially challenging commute for some families from the Hiller Highland area to Thornhill Elementary. And second, we heard a desire to make this change temporary so that we have the opportunity to reevaluate the attendance boundary with updated application and enrollment data and consider the impact this change has had on families and schools in the area down the road. Based on that, our updated proposal is that families living in the Hiller Highland Kaiser attendance area would temporarily have neighborhood preference to both Thornhill Elementary and Chabot Elementary. This boundary change is intended to be in place for 2 years, as you'll see in the resolution. And then before that 2-year timeline expires, OUSD staff and board would reevaluate the attendance boundary with the community to make a more permanent recommendation. I'm happy to take questions.
Questions from the board? Director Yee.
I want to thank you for your thoughtful adjustment. I think it's prudent, and hopefully it stimulates us to move forward with a revisit of the entire enrollment policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments by board members?
I just echo, thank you for making the adjustments. The feedback was incorporated. I appreciate it.
Vice President Lynn.
Yep, thank you for your work and for your active listening skills. I'm very interested in seeing how we move forward on a longer-term enrollment update and what that process will look like. And I think this was a good compromise in the interim. So we will have to keep monitoring, but thank you for your service.
Great. Any other comments? All right, at this time, we will move on to public comment on this item. Thank you, Ms. Marka. Public comment on S.-3. Once again, we'll give 1 minute per speaker. The speaker must be speaking on this item. As I announced at the beginning of the meeting, if there's more than 3 individuals that are not speaking to this item, we will have to move on to the next item and not take any further public comment. Go ahead.
You need to give us a second, please.
Why are you not taking any more public comment?
We're doing public comment right now.
All right, let's go.
S.-3.
Thank you. I'm a Kaiser parent. I live in the Northwest Hills. You heard from all the students, which Ms. London called statistically insignificant, that not enough neighbors attend, but actually you send everybody to different schools. We have school choice in Oakland, so your quality for Blueprint or your Blueprint quality, it says every student deserves a quality school, but I guess not my children, because you decided to close it. I just saw our librarian volunteer 40 hours a week for free get arrested because his leg got stuck and the police had a baton on him and tried to turn Jody, are you proud of that? This is what you want for your constituents? No, that is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. I have black children. We live in Oakland, and we deserve to be heard. And what you guys are doing is shameful. There were 20 police cars outside for 50 parents. Our children were crying hysterically, and now they're traumatized thanks to you all. Thank
Your time
you.
has now elapsed. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Amelia Bailey. I'm an Oakland resident, Oakland graduate. I live in Oakland, East Oakland. My kids went to Kaiser. I just want to let you know that what you're doing is shameful. I don't know how you sleep at night, and I know there's going to be 4 open vacancies, but everyone will remember you. Just so you know, we're going to remember you. Just know that.
Thank you. So we are taking comments for item S.-3.
My name is Stosh Molesky, and I have a son at Kaiser Elementary. I wanted to talk about the redistricting. I think that what you guys are trying to do, redistrict Kaiser so that the students go to Thornhill, primarily that are from the neighborhood, is just an example of how you're dismantling Kaiser. You have no intention of merging Kaiser with Sankofa. You're really just dismantling Kaiser, and that's why there's really no room for all the Kaiser and Sankofa parents students at Sankofa. They have, I think, 8 functioning classrooms. There's not nearly enough room. You'd have to invest $700,000 to get enough portable units just to house like not even 100% of the students from Kaiser and Sankofa. So you want to spend $700,000, and then but you're sending all the neighborhood kids from Kaiser over to Thornhill, which is basically one long block from Montclair. So clearly you're going to be closing one of those 2 schools very soon, because they're 2 hill schools right next to each other, basically. So you guys have no shame for the way you've treated these people.
Your time has now elapsed. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
All right, my name is Tracy. I have 2 kids at Kaiser. I just wanted to say, congratulations to our school board. I guess making our schools white again. Kaiser was, had no majority, very diverse school. You're sending all of our white children from the hills back to the hills to the Thornhill Elementary where, so what are you doing? Our school was already integrated. You're segregating our schools with this plan. Congratulations, Jody. You got your swan song. You wanted to close Kaiser. There you go. But we're not going away. Oakland is not for sale. We'll be back.
I just want to say that I was scared when the police arrested the grown-ups.
All right, any other comments for
Yes.
item S.
My name is Steve Neat. I taught at Kaiser School. This is my 16th or 17th year there. I can't even remember. My daughter just started kindergarten there. I have 2 other children who are going to go there. We are not going away. We will remember tonight what you did. And I want to make it very clear. There was never, was not tonight, and will never be any physical threats towards any OUSD board members or staff. We are not, unlike you, in the business of dishing out physical blows. But we will not go away. We will be here every time you meet. We may meet you other places. We will not touch you. We will not come within arm's reach of you. But we are not going away until our demands are met.
Thank you. Your time is now elapsed.
You know, I don't know if school board members actually go back and watch the videos of these meetings, but you know what we've experienced today, just in this short amount of time, is the community showing up because they want to engage around the issues that are going on, and the school board's response is to call the police on us. And now we have this issue where you're changing the attendance boundaries for our schools, and there's been no engagement. You came up with this plan 2 weeks ago because your last meeting at Kaiser Elementary, you told them they'd be zoned with a different school. So this plan is only about 2 weeks old, maybe 3 weeks. And at the last school board meeting, because of your illegal activity, there was only 3 of us left in the room when this item even came up. So not only have you not engaged the Kaiser community, I know you haven't engaged the Thornhill community, and I know there's been no discussion citywide for how these changes will affect other schools or the community or the city as a whole. So you're just gonna make this permanent decision, just pull it out of thin air on a whim. That's why our district is in such trouble. That's why we say failure by design, and that's why.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Any other speakers on this item?
This is going to end up hurting the voting process that you need to have in place when you go to the people to ask them for their money. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to tell them absolutely no. Because if you can't respect the will of the parents and the teachers, the voters should not respect anything that goes on the ballot. And you know you have to go to the voters in March and in November. And it's not going to happen if you don't do something to work with these parents. And so go right ahead. But you know you need that money. And it's not going to happen if you don't learn how to work with parents and teachers and this community.
Any other speakers for this item?
You know, the police are still here just guarding the stage. Did you know that? You guys aren't even down here, and they're still standing here making a paycheck.
You've already had a chance to speak, I believe.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other speakers who have not spoken on this item yet?
Good evening, Board. I wanted to point out a few things to you. The first thing is as elected representatives, you need to listen to the people who you represent. It's really important. Yeah, it's really important, and I say that as somebody who held an elected position at my college last year. If 10 people came to me and said this is a concern, I would have looked into it and I wouldn't have ignored it. I also want to say that there are children writing you notes in the hallway because you have basically cut off their ability to speak or to address the board or to be part of the process. And I hope you read those notes, and I hope you see how you have affected many of the children in this city. Okay, and I want you to think about that and think about, are you really doing your job? I don't think so. Thank you.
Any other speakers for this item?
Yeah,
Are you here to speak on the Kaiser boundary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no. I'm here to ask you why there are still this many cops down here guarding an empty stage. I don't understand. Can you explain it?
Okay.
Can you please explain it?
So we're taking comments for
No,
the
could you explain
Kaiser
it? I don't
attendance
understand. I'm confused, and I would like it explained.
All right.
You can't explain it? Are you serious? What's your explanation?
All right. At this time, we're not responding to comments right now. Is there any other public speakers ready to speak on this item S.-3?
The problem that you have is that you're not responding to any comments that we have. We've had people come up here week after week after week, and then you just go ahead and vote the way you want to vote. I'm watching you guys. You're supposed to be listening to us, and most of you are looking at your goddamn laptops.
Are you here to
Look
speak
at
on the
screen.
Kaiser
That's
attendance
where we
boundary?
are. We're talking to you. You need to respond to us.
All right. So we're going to move on if there's no additional comments on this item. We're listening to comments for the redrawing of the Kaiser attendance boundary.
I haven't spoken, yeah. Testing. Yes. So you guys need to take a class on communication. When you showed up at Kaiser, I'm a Kaiser parent, you came with your agenda, you told us what you were going to do, and then when we got upset, you left the meeting 20 minutes in, and then you made up a flimsy excuse that you had another meeting. So you're either just a poor scheduler,
Are you speaking
or
towards
you're
the
lying
attendance
to
boundary?
us. I'm talking to all of you. So then we have meetings here, and you give us a minute to pour our hearts out, and you don't pay attention. You look dead inside. You look half asleep. You don't even have the respect to pretend you care. And then when we get upset because you make a decision that impacts our children, you seem surprised by that.
Thank you.
And then
Your
you
time has now
hide
elapsed.
away in a room and give us a
So it does not appear that there's more speakers that are here to speak for this specific item, which is redrawing the Kaiser attendance boundary. We've had more than 3 speakers that have been speaking off topic. So as I stated in the beginning of the meeting, that means that we will no longer have public comment for this item, and we will move on, since it does not appear that there's any additional speakers that are here to speak on this item. I see you, but are you here to speak on this item? We've had more than 3 speakers that have not spoken
Can you
directly
start
on
the
this
clock
item.
again, Amy? So this zoning, whatever this is that you're talking about now, is just the last example of the next slide from Kyla. We've listened for months, and you've asked us to assume good intent. I've spoken to a few of you personally with my personal story. Gary, you know it. Jody, you know it. Kyla, I spoke to you after the vote. You know the situations of my family, and I've assumed good intent for months and months and months, and all we've met with is lies. Every time we've heard your evidence, Kyla, your mission statement of what you're looking for, you've shown and heard demonstrably evidence after evidence of that Kaiser is the perfect example of that. I spoke to you, Kyla, that it is now time. You can't ask us to assume good intent without delivering it.
Are you
You've
speaking about
talked
the
talk.
attendance boundary?
Yes. So when I last spoke to Kyla, I said it's now time to actually put actions and not just ask us to assume good intent. Since then, the last thing she did, the only reason to close Kaiser that she gave, and this is important, Kyla, so please don't cut me off.
Thank you.
The only reason you gave was...
Your time has now elapsed. You can, I'm sure you can email the superintendent@ousd.org if you would like to provide further comments to the superintendent. All right, next speaker on this item, we need to make sure that we're speaking directly to the item, redrawing Kaiser attendance boundaries. If we're not going to be speaking to this item, then we're going to have to move on.
No, I'm here talking about attendance. My name is Susan Keene from Oakland International. Come on in, friend.
So the last thing that...
We don't cede, I'm sorry, but we don't, as I stated in the beginning of the meeting, we don't cede time to other speakers.
The only reason it was being closed so that more people could walk to their local school.
And then the next letter that Kyla sent to everyone who could walk...
And then the next letter that Kyla sent to everyone that could walk to Kaiser was they were going to rezone them to a school over 3 miles away, not very freaking walkable. When there was a walking school 0.9 miles away.
And every single one of your
And every single one of your comments has been recorded, and we're basically going to call you out on all of your lies for the past, I don't know, year and a half, 17 years, you name it. You've been completely lying all the time.
Thank you. Next speaker. You're here to speak about the redrawn Kaiser attendance boundary.
My name is Mary Grace McGee. I'd like to speak about
the way that the population of Kaiser is being separated by this rezoning. Because I do believe that the decisions you're making are often examples of classism or institutional racism, both. In this case, you're taking the wealthiest part of the population, basically, of Kaiser, and moving them over to Montclair, also a wealthy area. And then you're taking all the rest of the people and shuffling them around to other places. So putting them in motion to any number of other places, but yet in some ways trying to treat this other population differently. It's not that I don't think they should go to school in Montclair, but I'm just saying that your decisions show bias. They always show bias.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Jonathan. So you want to talk about redrawing Kaiser attendance boundary, S-3-192045. I'll comment on that. You're talking about redrawing a line. Why don't you talk about giving us a real plan for your future of the schools in this district? You're talking about redrawing a boundary. Why don't you talk about giving us data for what you're actually planning on doing when you do all these mergers and closures? You're talking about redrawing a boundary. You want to talk about redrawing a boundary. Where's your vision for building a better district? Your analysis for all the decisions you've done, you have not articulated a plan. You have not left us with any confidence. You all have fancy degrees. At least 3 or 4 of you went to very fancy sounding schools, and you have singularly been incapable of articulating a vision that leaves us with an ounce of confidence that you are not making a massive mistake. So you want to talk about redrawing a boundary. You want to talk about redrawing a boundary. Why don't you go back and redraw your analysis and rethink what you're doing? That'll be a better use of time than talking about redrawing a boundary.
Thank you for your comments. Move on to the next speaker if there's any more speakers. All right, does not appear that there's additional speakers. Okay, one more speaker. Please speak to the item that we are discussing.
Yeah, I'll speak to the item. My name is Eric Pettengill. I'm a teacher here in Oakland and an Oakland resident, Oakland parent. I think that you need a plan. You have not engaged the community effectively. What you're doing right now is more or less illegal. More than less, it seems like. We still have quite a number of some of the lowest paid members of your staff, the SSOs, down here doing and representing you very poorly. And I think that's shameful because all these families here are not a threat. They are here to comment on this item. Many of them are here because they're the families directly affected by your choices. Now, I'm going to speak more to the public than to you, but I'm going to speak to this item, and I'm going to use my last 15 seconds and to remind you that 4 of you are leaving. 4 of you are already leaving, and so we know your vote's already been made. So this will follow you. And if you continue to do this and continue to close Kaiser, then the shame of this will follow you, and we will make sure it does. All of you who vote on this, and don't go back and revisit this plan.
Thank you. Your time has now lapsed.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Mayra y estoy comentando en cómo esta póliza y todas las pólizas que han tenido esta noche y otras noches afecta a nuestros estudiantes más afectados y de veras es una vergüenza cómo están tratando ustedes a nuestros estudiantes que se ven como mí, our black and brown students. No entiendo por qué estamos haciendo estos tipos de cosas y no estamos escuchando a la comunidad. Se están escondiendo de veras como unos cobardes y estoy enfadada yo porque mis taxes y los taxes de los que están aquí pagan por su trabajo y no lo están haciendo bien. Desgraciadamente.
All right, so at this time we are going to move to vote on this item. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call on this item?
Yes, on the item S.-3, on the roll call. Director Torres?
Yes.
Director Hinton Hodge?
Yes.
Director Yee?
Yes.
Director Gonzalez?
Yes.
Director Harris? Yes. Vice President London?
Yes.
President Ng?
Yes.
The motion's adopted.
Thank you. At this time, we do have to take public comment on non-agenda items that was scheduled for 7:30 or shortly thereafter. So this is an opportunity to speak to any item that's not on the agenda. We will continue to take 1 minute only and have a strict cutoff after 1 minute. Because this is a public comment on non-agenda items, you don't need to speak directly to the topic. So at this time, if you can line up, if you're interested in speaking to this item, now is the time to do so. Please line up if you're here to speak on public comment on non-agenda items. As I said before, we will have a 1 minute allocation and a strict cutoff. So if the first speaker wants to come up and introduce him or herself, now is the time. Hi, Mr. Mordecai. Please go ahead.
Hey,
You have 1
Mordecai,
minute.
speaking as an individual. I think it's really, I made a big point previously about the board committing a crime by using bond money in an inappropriate way. And I think the problem began with the state takeover. And what happened then was that concept was that you had to cut bureaucratic force and go to consultants. And what is happening here on misspending bond money is that the consultants don't know what's going on. Therefore, you as a school board are required to do a greater job of knowing what's going on.
Thank you, Mr.
Your
Mordecai.
ignorance is not
Your time is now elapsed.
Good evening, board. My name is Carol Dalton. I'm really sorry that what I need to speak to is not on the agenda tonight, because you all announced in your plans that the multi-year projections and the process of bringing forward to the public what your plans were for achieving those balances were going to come forward, not even tonight, but a week ago. You had a plan for community engagement. You had a plan to do better than you've done in past years. Instead, you are repeating the mistakes that you've made by not having an adequate timeline for community engagement around your proposals. Your staff has not provided you with the fiscal information that you need to have that discussion, and you need to make sure that you get that information so that you can make the decisions that the public deserves and that the public can be involved.
Thank you, Ms. Dalton.
Megan Bumpus. I'm a OUSD teacher. And last week I attended what's called a 7-11 meeting, which is a meeting where a committee votes on whether OUSD property is surplus or not surplus. This meeting was embarrassing for OUSD. There were questions that were really simple and fundamental and basic to the idea, should this property of OUSD be surplus or not, that district staff were unable to respond to. It really felt a lot like there wasn't actually a point to the meeting. It was just for show. If you're not going to come prepared, when the community, there were at least 50 people there, community members, parents, kids. And so if you're going to show up and say that you're engaging the community but not come with the most basic information, it really sends a bad message. We don't actually care what you say. We're not going to prepare for this. There's no reason to have a meeting like that. So there's no reason to lie or fake it. If you don't care, just show it like you're doing today.
Tracy Gordon, just wanted to comment again on the meeting tonight. I thought that there was so excessive force. You know, you need to remember what city you're working in. We have a lot of sensitive children here. we're trying to encourage people to tear down walls. You're building a wall. Bad enough. You're on your phone. You're on your laptop. You're not paying attention to us. Now you need to put up a wall to ignore us. Doesn't work. You can't do that. You had 15 police officers and a wall so that you could ignore us. And then when we wanted to have our voice heard, you called OPD and had 30 different police officers here. You had 6 paddy wagons on each corner of this building. For what? We're parents. No one has ever tried to hurt you. We were singing. You're trying to close our school. We're just trying to save our schools. We're trying to keep police officers out of our schools. My God, if that's how you treat parents, what are you doing to our children at school? My God.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Mike Hutchinson. So just so the board knows, you're on video down here. So as we're speaking, we can see Director London and Harris in the back talking, not even listening to us. Maybe that's why you ran upstairs. I am so personally offended, especially with the board members that I know personally. A couple of board members I've actually known my whole life. Y'all called the police on us today. And it was obvious that that was the plan all along. This is at a time that we have our budgets being mismanaged. At the same time, you're voting to close schools. At the same time, you plan on selling our property. At the same time, we still have lead in our water. In the same time that we've had a series of burglaries at our school sites. At the same time, we've had increased fights at our high schools due to lack of staffing. And the school board's response is to run upstairs and hide instead of actually addressing any of these things. You just voted to change schools' attendance boundaries, and you haven't even talked to the schools. Like, this is so far beyond, and I've seen a lot of things. Just so you know, we will never forget this, and there's no coming back from this. Once you call the police on us, that's the final straw. So expect to, like Mr. Neat said, we won't touch you. We don't threaten people physically, but a lot of us have loud mouths. And whenever I see you now in public or in private, you will hear every word out of my mouth every single time.
Your time
We
is
will
now
not forget.
elapsed.
That's great. Your time is just about.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. My name is Derek. I'm an Oakland resident. It makes us feel good to yell at you guys. And I'm sure it doesn't feel very good to be yelled at, but so I'd like to ask a question, and I'd like this to be taken seriously. Will you please reconsider the September 11th vote? Will you please go back and at least put a pause on it? All we're asking is for some time, at least in the minimum, for us to have a dialogue to make any transition work, but we don't want to close our school, obviously. But I just like to ask you respectfully, please go back and look at this. Don't make a hasty decision. Also, I'd like to say that Board Member London, it was regrettable you weren't at Monday's meeting. We heard that you had to cancel last minute, but it would have been nice if we would have had at least two board members at Monday's meeting with the City Council. But going back to my other comment, please consider this. Ask respectfully that you reconsider this vote.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Any other speakers here for public comment on non-agenda items, please come to the podium at this time.
Good evening, board. This is Eric Pettengill, Oakland parent, Oakland teacher. I think it's clear to everyone in the room who's been coming to these meetings these last few years that some of you really have no care at all for these families and parents, because you continue to pay them lip service. You continue to not listen. It's been documented of the lack of engagement. I also think it's shameful that, as far as I understand, the work plan that was voted on without public comment last week is probably a legal vote also, since Brown might have been violated there as well. I'm disappointed that rather than presenting that work plan, which has some very lofty goals and some really interesting metrics in it, rather than presenting that, the superintendent decided to send us all home with homework and told us to go home and look it up, which I also found regrettably terrible. I'm not even sure how to respond to that exactly. I also, again,
Thank
am
you.
really
Your time-
just.
your time is now
my
elapsed.
last. Thank you. My last comment is.
As I stated before, we're taking a 1-minute cutoff. All right, next speaker, please. All right, next speaker, please.
Hello, I'm a parent of a Kaiser student, and from the meeting that was the vote, we had a lot of issues with how that went down and the process. Out of many of the discussions, there were two key questions for me that were not answered that we would like answers to. One is, what are your intentions with the Kaiser location following your intended closure? We would like transparency about that. Secondly, two of your board members actually asked this question and it was never answered. The question was, why is there a school that is 3 blocks away that was not considered for this merger, and why was there no answer to this question? It seems very logical. It's in a portable. And so what we're asking for is maybe you have a really good answer, but you haven't given us one, nor have you answered the questions. And these are just two of many of the questions that we've asked continuously that you haven't answered. We'd like answers. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Susan Keene, and I just wanted to say I do know the answer to the question. You guys are selling Kaiser to Mercedes-Benz, so we should all just know that and just make that really clear and apparent. I also got an email from John Sasaki. Thank you for talking to me earlier. I got an email that said that you were perhaps going to put that into low-income teacher housing. And I would just like to ask again that instead of providing low-income teacher housing, it would be really, really cool if you paid us a living wage so that we could stay and teach and live in Oakland, because we're here for the students and we're not going anywhere. So we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Have fun.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Any additional speakers for public comment non-agenda items? All right, so we're moving on. Does not appear that there's additional speakers for that. I do believe we have let's see here, a second part of this item, item Q2. This is filing requests for new charter petitions, major amendments, material revisions, and renewals. Item Q.-2. This is an opportunity to submit pursuant to Board Policy 0420.4, all requests for new charter petitions.
Thank you. Good evening, Oakland's Unified School District School Board. My name is Dr. Nicole Williams Browning. I'm submitting the charter request and renewal petition for Aspire Berkeley Maynard Academy for your approval.
Good evening. My name is Jenna Stoffer. I'm the CEO of Lighthouse Community Public Schools. Tonight I submit a renewal petition for Lighthouse Community Charter High School.
Hello, my name is Charlotte Richardson. I am the co-executive director of Francophone Charter School of Oakland, and I'm here to submit our petition for renewal of our charter.
Hello, my name is David Cloker. I'm the head of school of North Oakland Community Charter School. I am here to submit the petition for North Oakland Community Charter School.
Good evening, Oakland Unified School Board. Whoa. My name is Stacy Smith. I am submitting the charter petition for Oakland School for the Arts for your approval.
Good evening, board. My name is Carla Victor, and I am the principal at Roses and Concrete Community School, and I am here to submit the petition, charter petition for Roses. Thank you.
Thank you. We will refer all of the renewal petitions to staff. That will come back to the board at a separate time. This time we have to take public comment on that item. This is item Q.-2. Are there public comments on item Q.-2? Does not appear. Does not appear that there's any public comments for item Q.-2. It's a non-voting item. That was just a submission. So we are back onto the regular agenda. We're now at new business. New business can be found on page 36. We're on item T.-1. Is there a motion to adopt item T.-1, which is a, let me see here. Yes, I'm looking at the, okay. So what this is this is a motion to change the date for the recalibration of expenditure reduction targets and or revenue enhancement targets, which was supposed to, we had initially approved for this to come to this meeting based on advice from Alameda County Office of Education and our state trustee. In conversations with them, it has been recommended that we take a little more time to identify the target reduction numbers and to postpone this item till later in the calendar year. So is there a motion to adopt item T.-1?
I'll move adoption, but I want to have a board conversation about this.
Of course. Moved by Director Gonzalez. Is there a second? Seconded by Vice President London, so that we're bringing this to the floor. I don't believe that there's a presentation on this, but I do believe staff is available in case there are additional questions to come up. As I explained before, we did have a resolution that we passed in June of 2019, which committed ourselves to target reductions for the 2020 to 2021 year and 21 to 22 year. This was based off of conversations with the County Office of Education in order to approve our adopted budget for this year. Because of the both staff's ability, some transitions within our staffing, as well as wanting to really make sure that we're taking and examining a closer look at our numbers. The county and state trustee, in conversations with our staff and superintendent, have recommended that we wait until the first interim to really have the most updated information before setting targets for the 2 subsequent years. Director Gonzalez, I know that you have some questions, so I will invite up our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Luz Casares, who can respond to questions about that.
Thanks. I believe, Mr. Thomas, that we're going to be talking about the timeline for budget development at the Budget and Finance Committee on the 5th. So I think that's an opportunity for me and for members of our committee, as well as members of the public, to learn more about this. But my main concern here is that last year there was widespread dissatisfaction on the board and in the community about how the timeline kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back for us to have an accurate picture of what the budget reduction target was going to be. And then the most important thing, I think, from our perspective, was to make sure that there was a coherent rationale for the way that budget reductions were made. And I don't think anybody on the board was satisfied with the way that it happened. And from my perspective, there was never a real alignment between what are our goals for student achievement and the positions that were cut. They were mostly vacant positions, or there just wasn't a lot of alignment between what we're trying to achieve for students and the way that budget reductions were done. And so I'm just feeling nervous with the timeline being pushed back again. I'm having flashbacks of last year and how it just kept getting pushed back. And by the time that you guys actually brought us a set of reductions, there wasn't adequate time for us to really vet. It didn't feel like staff had done sufficient vetting. So that's the concern, and I really want to understand why. I don't understand why. I feel like we have a general sense, and we can always change the target later, update the target later. So what is the need to push back this timeline right now?
Sure. So right now you're on target to identify. We're on target to identify $10 million. Sorry. Oh, yes, Luz Cáceres. I am supporting the school district with its finances. So right now, we're on target to cut $10 million for the upcoming fiscal year. And just broadly speaking, the way that timeline will work is we've got second interim that is presented to the board in March. And so in order to present a second interim report that will reflect that we meet our minimum reserve requirements, we expect to have all spending reductions approved by the board by the end of February, so that second meeting in February, which then leaves January and February to present and have the board discuss the possibilities of where those reductions might come from. That is a very common schedule that school districts use to be able to make those hard decisions that have to be made by February. The piece that's happening for this resolution is about really refining what that number is, whether it's 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, 5 million, whatever that number ultimately is. The more information we have, the better off we'll be in terms of being able to define that number. And first interim is when we'll actually be go through the entirety of the process of revising the budget. As you know, we've had some opportunities to make some revisions with the 45-day. We made some revisions in September, and we've got more revisions coming to the board tonight. Those aren't complete. We're still working our way through the entirety of the budget. And so that really is why we're looking for refining that final number in December as opposed to in October.
Let me one more question. So the timeline for budget development, are you guys presenting that at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting on the 5th? When are we actually going to see a timeline? Because I don't feel like we've seen one yet this year.
I'm going to look over to Preston on that one.
So that's kind of what we are engaging in a process right now where all the central departments are developing their budgets. And one of the key aspects of the budget development, they're essentially doing the site plans very similar to what a school site does. They should be completed with that at the end of this week. They're going to go through consultancies, and during the consultancies, that's where we're going to use the smarter spending framework and some saving opportunities. There's about 70 different savings opportunities to go through and discuss those with each individual department. We'll then be able to report back on that. And I think once we see that analysis that each of the departments has done, we'll be bringing that to the Budget and Finance Committee. And so that's where we would roll out the entire timeline to the Budget and Finance Committee that could then be brought to the board.
Okay, so in summary, yes, we'll see a timeline on
Yes,
November 5th.
Absolutely.
And just because we received an email from Ms. Dalton about timeline, I did want to say that because in the resolution it says by December 31st, but the intent, as I understand it, is that the resolution will come back at the first meeting, or well, the only meeting in December with the first interim report. Can we confirm that? I believe it's December 13th or somewhere around there. December 11th. Can we confirm that that's the plan? Is that it's not going to be moved to January? It would be the resolution would be coming back on December 11th. Great, Director Yee.
Is this an opportunity for us to talk about some of the budget numbers broadly, or is this only about the calendaring, this item? Because I actually had a question because our budget director mentioned 10, 15, or $20 million of cuts in this coming year. So the part that I would like to understand is I know both in the settlement of our contracts last year and the ongoing costs and the settlements of this year, there's some predicted costs, but they weren't necessarily built in for this coming year, which leads to the necessity of the cuts for the 2021 year. But since you've been cleaning the books and matching up all the items, can you give us some confidence that the cuts that the board adopted at the end of last year to balance the budget and to provide us fiscal vitality for this coming year, did we actually make the cuts in terms of the positions and the budget savings?
Yeah, so for the reductions that the board approved in 18-19 for 19-20.
Yes, those are the ones I mean.
Right, we did a reconciliation, and in that early reconciliation, what we identified was that we'd made about 80% of the reductions that we needed. And part of what we've been doing with the budget revision work is identifying some of those restricted resources, some of those carryover balances that might be available to us to be able to essentially realize the other 20% that we missed the mark on.
Because that's what you shared with us in the last meeting, that's the scrubbing you were doing during this period. So do you now have confidence that you'll get up to the 100% mark by the first interim?
I don't know that I could say that confidently today, but it definitely will be a question we will have answered when we're done preparing the first interim report.
Because I think that's part of the ambivalence of the board, trying to understand whether we make the cut or we propose the cuts, adopted the cuts, and they weren't made, or if there are other factors that come into play so that we can position ourselves in December to make thoughtful decisions between December and June when we adopt the next budget.
Right, and including in that, I would submit to you, is the implementation plan to ensure that if the board approves X million dollars in cuts, we're able to realize X million dollars in cuts. Right. Implementation is as important as the plan.
I think if there's more questions, Director Yu, we can also, during the budget revision too, which is the next item, ask questions at that time too.
Okay.
Vice President London.
Ms. Cazares, just because there may be people watching or in the audience who aren't familiar with the budgeting process, you were talking earlier about how we're scrubbing the budget, we're refining the budget, and yet we adopted the budget in June. Could you explain that process a little bit? I think that would be helpful for the public.
Sure. So a budget is built based on assumptions, right? And I want to be really clear what that means. It is a guess. Now, what makes an assumption special for us is that we work really diligently to make sure that it's built based on sound assumptions. So it's a guess, but it should be a very, very good guess. And just to give you some examples of those guesses, we make guesses about the number of kids who are going to ultimately enroll in our system. We make guesses about how often those kids who enroll in our system actually attend class. Those are guesses. And we work really hard to refine those guesses. The reason, I know I've said this before, and I think it's an important point for people to hear, is sometimes we can feel a frustration that the numbers keep changing in our budget. And I would submit to you it's reasonable that they change in our budget, and I would submit to you it'd be very unreasonable and alarming for me if I saw a budget where the numbers didn't change. They should change because with every passing day in the fiscal year, we have better information than we previously had, right? Whereas before we had a guess about the number of kids we would enroll, we now know how many kids we enrolled on at our 20th day count. And so with every one of those bits of those data nuggets that we realize, we want to refine our budget to make sure we are estimating our expenditures and estimating our revenues based on the best information available.
Other questions by the board? I had two additional questions that came from one of our constituents I thought were good points. So with because the first interim only covers up to October 30th, or October 31st, are we still going to be able to, at that time, have data that runs through as current as possible for the targets for the remainder of the year?
Yes. So thank you for the question. So it is, first interim report, when it comes to the board in the middle of December, well, it comes in the middle of December, we actually push to have as our best projections through the month of November. The October 31st date merely reflects our actuals. So it's one of the columns in our report that is going to be based on October 31st. In terms of the projections we're making, we don't stop working on October 31st. We continue to take the information we gather in November. And that's important to note because in November is when the LAO, the Legislative Analyst Office, releases some of their economic forecast for the state, but particularly for school districts. And so it's an important piece of data for us in November.
Great, thank you. And then the last question just has to do with potential staff transitions and making sure that there's continuities, because I know that, unfortunately your contract is until December, and just wanting to make sure that there is continuity as we go through staff's transitions around the numbers that are being used, and confidence in the numbers, and that there will be as a seamless transition as we look to transition in staff in the new year.
I am absolutely committed to that. I live nearby. I'm not falling off the face of the planet. This is the work I do. This is what I love doing, and so I will absolutely be available to ensure that transition is smooth.
Great, thank you. That's the questions I have at this time. Any other questions by board members? All right, thank you very much. We'll now move on to public comment. Oh, okay. Director Hinton-Hodge, go ahead.
Thanks so much. And this actually may be more in the realm of budget development, but for the sake of even the public and just ourselves, where do you see the LCAP process and the PSAC? Am I saying it right? Where can they get engaged and involved? Because I know, as Director Gonzalez talked about, a level of frustration that we had, and she kind of said community, but we actually have a body that has some, legislative responsibility around thinking about our priorities as it relates to the LCAP. And so I'm just kind of curious as to where that gets folded in, and maybe it's a question for later, and who's responsible? Is that Mr. Thomas? Who's responsible for making sure that our PSAC folks are well engaged?
So I'm going to hand it over to Sandra.
Good evening, Sandra Aguilera, Chief Academic Officer for Oakland Unified. Director Hinton-Hodge, we started the process last Wednesday at our last PSAC meeting. We had Troy Christmas there representing the budget team to talk to the PSAC about the steps we were taking to go through budget development. And we focused on, as the board knows, we are facing an update to our 3-year plan. And so the goals need to be refined. So we started with our goals first. So that way we're making investments that reflect our goals. So they have been involved as of last week. That was the first meeting around budget development and goal setting. And so each month they will have opportunity to inform the work that's happening. They are also knowledgeable about the Budget and Finance Committee, and we've been saying if you want to be even more connected to the work, you're invited to come to those forums as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, at this time we're gonna move on to public comment on this item. I see Ms. Dalton already at the podium. If you are interested in speaking on this item, please line up behind Ms. Dalton. Go ahead, Ms. Dalton.
Thank you, President Ng, for asking some of the questions that I submitted. Ms. Casares, there may be a common timeline in other districts, but those districts are not under investigation by the grand jury. And those districts are not under supervision by ACOE. And those districts don't have a public that feels so excluded from the process. I'm asking the board to amend the resolution to hear the recommendations at your very next meeting. You will have enough information to make good decisions. It may change. Things are always changing, but it will be a start to getting the public involved. do the same thing you've done year after year, and you're going to end up with the same problems that you've had year after year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dalton. Other comments by the public?
So, Mike Hutchinson, just so the board can know, it's impossible to hear down here what's happening, so it makes it really hard to engage. But I did hear Director Hinton Hodges' question, and it's funny because the members of the PSAC committee are sitting down here, and they asked to be let into the meeting, and they weren't allowed. But then we just watched all the people with charter school applications and renewals. They were allowed upstairs. They're not staff, and they're not media. So why did you select to allow them upstairs, but you won't allow us? It seems very selective. So when it comes to these budget revisions in the budget, we've still had no clarification about how this board was $40 million off in their projections last year. We've also had no vote, no resolution to return the $3 million to our school sites that your budget resolution states you're supposed to do. So that's great you're asking if they made enough cuts from staff, but that wasn't a part of your budget resolution. So what about returning the money to our school sites? So it's really hard to talk when I'm at the podium and police officers are moving the railing that's touching me while I'm at the podium trying to speak.
Thank you, Mr.
This
Hutchinson.
school board has done this to us tonight. So
Is this thing on? Hello? Anybody there?
Yeah, we're here. Go ahead.
Hello?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Anybody there?
We
They
can hear you. Go
Okay.
ahead.
My question is this. It was revealed at the Education Partnership meeting through documentation that the City of Oakland has not given any money to Oakland Promise. It's been held by the city treasurer because Oakland Promise is not a 501c3. It is my understanding that this school district has given money to Oakland Promise. Understanding that they are not a 501c3, are you going to request that that money that you budgeted for Oakland Promise will be returned to your budget? Because they are not a legitimate 501c3. This means that if you did this with Oakland Promise, that you gave money to illegitimate agencies or non-existent 501c3s, I think it's important that we have an audit around all of the expenditures that you have made if you've been that careless in spending the people's money. How much money have you given to Oakland Promise?
Thank you. Your time is
And will you
elapsed.
take that money?
Next speaker, please. Are there any other speakers on this item? Does not appear so. Mr. Rakestraw, we are ready for a roll call on this item.
On item, the roll call on item T.-1, which is the extension of the timeline for the presentation of the targets and revenue enhancements by the board. Director Hinton Hodge?
Yes.
Okay. Director Gonzalez?
I'm going to abstain.
Did you say abstain? Okay. Director Torres?
Yes.
Director Yee?
Yes.
Director Harris? Vice President London?
Yes.
President Ing?
Yes.
Motion's adopted.
Thank you. We are on item T.-2. This is the budget revision number 2. It is listed as an adoption. We don't have a resolution that it's attached, so it will likely be a presentation. I believe it should be a presentation to the board. We will have our Chief Financial Officer come up to present this item, and then we can have the board ask questions. I'm not going to, although it's listed as an adoption, I'm not going to ask for a motion at this time. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have our second batch of budget revisions. And just to do a quick reminder of where we've been so far, right? We had our adopted budget back in June. On July 2nd, we had approval of the TA with SEIU. And so because of that, we then went into a process of having of reviewing our budget for revisions that need to get accomplished. And so on September 11th, the board approved the first batch of budget revisions. And then today we're presenting a second batch of budget revisions. First interim would then be that third set of revisions for the board's consideration. But the theme aligning all of this is all about just refining our budget based on the best information that's available to the board. So just a couple of notes. One, the revisions you see here to revenues and sources and expenditures and uses are all new and different from what the board approved on September 11th. The one that's a little bit unique is that very first one that you see to the revisions to revenues and sources. And that's the $4 million of revenue we're receiving for our special education early intervention preschool grant. On September 11th, the board already heard that we were receiving the $4 million, and the $4 million has been incorporated into our budget. We had not established how we were going to spend those dollars. The two possibilities are, one, using it to create new programs and services for our preschoolers on IEPs, or to use it to offset the contribution we're currently making to our special education program, and essentially offset some of that contribution that we've already budgeted. So that had not been determined at that point. Based on what we have today, we are going ahead and recommending that we go ahead and use it to offset the contribution. So that would be $4 million that would drop down to the bottom line. Some minor revisions that we have to revenue. One is to our mandate cost block grant. That actually reflected a small decrease in our state revenue of about $100,000. We have a slight increase in the revenues we pick up on charter school leases. That was a positive $0.1 million. Lottery dollars, both on the unrestricted and restricted side, we're able to make some revisions to our projections, again, just based on the best information available to us based on ADA, our average daily attendance, as well as the rates that are available to us for those funds. It's an increase of about $0.1 million on the unrestricted side and an increase of $0.4 million on the restricted side. And just as a reminder, on the restricted side, it's restricted to instructional materials. For Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4, so our 3 title programs, those are federal programs. We've had one of our budgeting assumptions has been from year to year to make an assumption that we were going to receive a reduction in that funding by about 10%. So we are undoing that assumption. It's not going to be a given for us from year to year. And so with this year, that means an additional $2.3 million of restricted revenues for our title programs. Part of what makes our title programs special is that they are for our most special scholars who need the most services and most attention from us. So that's $2.3 million of an increase in our spending for our populations this year. And then another one is the Perkins Dollar. So that's an increase of about $500,000. And I chose to highlight that one, even though the amount isn't particularly significant and it's on the restricted side, is one of the other adjustments we'll be making to our budget development process is to really tease out which dollars should be budgeted on a continuing basis. And so when I look at Perkins, I would categorize as one of those revenue sources that should be continuously budgeted. And so it should be a part of the adopted budget every year. We always have to refine the amounts, but there's no reason to exclude it from the adopted budget.
Can you remind us what Perkins is for, please?
What is Perkins for? It's CTE, Career Technical Education.
Thank you.
And so we will one of the best budgeting practices that we sort of live by is we do not budget one-time dollars. And so we're going to stand by that assumption, that practice of not budgeting one-time dollars. And so that means those dollars that are not one-time, that are ongoing, will get budgeted. And so right now we can see we've identified Perkins as one example of that. And by the time we report to you back in first interim, we'll have a longer list of those revenue sources where we will continue to budget them as a part of adopted budget. On to expenditures. The first item is supplemental and concentration. At adopted budget, our revenues for supplemental and concentration were estimated accurately, and were all budgeted. And on the expenditure side, we actually did not have a balanced set of resource codes. It just means our revenues exceeded our expenditures, and so we needed to be able to show $8.8 million more in spending than what was in our adopted budget. And so that's part of the refinement process we've gone through in looking at our adopted budget, seeing what was in there, seeing what was missing. And so we've identified the $8.8 million of additional spending that we need to have in place in order to have our LCAP that was approved by the board match the budget that we have approved by the board. The next big batch, those next two bullet points, are about compensation, so salaries and benefits. We had a couple of steps we took to refine our salary projections. And one was to eliminate what we refer to as offset accounts. And so these are accounts that were in our budget where we were making assumptions about things like vacancy savings. And so what we've done is we've eliminated all of the offset accounts. And I would submit to you as a board a good question to ask when first interim comes and then second interim after that, and then budget adoption is a question might be something along the lines of, are there any offset accounts in the budget? And the answer you're looking for is no, there are no offset accounts. We want to know that we are budgeting for compensation based on the best information available without any assumptions about vacancies and savings that we might have. We take advantage of the vacancies after we achieve them, not before. We have gone ahead and made some adjustments to some of the vacancies that we have set up that's very comparable to the adjustments we made with our special education revisions. Just as a reminder, we went in, we looked at who are we hiring, who are we actually placing in the vacant positions, and then what are the assumptions we had with the vacant positions. And we had, in short, assumed we were going to hire people with more experience than we were actually hiring, and that has proved true in some other of the vacancies. And so we've gone ahead and refined those as well. And then the third piece we did, which is really the big one, and that's going in there and just now based on the best information we have, and it was as of the second week of October, sort of just based on having all of our positions filled, knowing what we have, going ahead and reforecasting all of our compensation costs. So going in there and actually really truly running a forecast based on all the positions we have filled, knowing who's there, and running a new forecast. And so the impact of all of those adjustments we've made to salaries and benefits, plus the one on the 20-day student count staffing. So we had our 20-day count, and we actually added 10 FTE, right? So 10 FTE to accommodate the additional 157 students that we enrolled. Of those 10 FTE, I want to just note that 6 of them did not impact our bottom line. So 3 of them were funded by Title II, so they did not impact the unrestricted ending fund balance. Another 3 were funded by existing positions that we didn't need to use in supplemental. And so 4 of the 10 FTE actually impacted our bottom line, not the full 10. The impact of all of those adjustments to salaries and benefits is about $500,000 to the good for us. So it reduces our spending about $5 million total on our 1,000 object code series, our 2,000 object code series, and our 3,000 object code series. So doing that revised forecast is always always a must-do for us, because we do want to take advantage of those vacancy savings once we actually do realize them. Just another item, the next item down is transportation. We looked at the budget, we looked at where we are, and we did not see a need for increasing the expenditures for it. And I know that was an item that came up as a question when we talked about special education. So we've now looked at the transportation piece of it, and there's no need for a revision so far. Utilities is the next one. We are increasing the cost of the budget for utilities by $1.6 million. And it has two components to it, and I do want to make sure we understand those. Of that $1.6 million, that's not the actual increase from year to year. That would be a very significant increase. The increase actually helps us match up to what we spent in 18-19. You may remember when we presented the unaudited actuals, we noted that we had to increase the budget for utilities at the end of the year. And so of this $1.6 million, $1.4 million of that is just to catch us up to where we spent last year. And then we need an additional $200,000 to reflect a 2% increase in our total spending for utilities. And so it's a total hit to our bottom line of about $1.6 million. Just a quick run through of those numbers, and I'm going to focus on the unrestricted side. And the reason I'm going to do that, because on the restricted side, we force ourselves to balance, right? We force ourselves to balance. If we get an additional $5 million, we spend an additional $5 million. And so we force ourselves to balance on the restricted side, with the exception of special education, and we've already revised that as needed. On the unrestricted side, what all of this adds up to is increase in revenue, unrestricted revenue of about $0.2 million, plus that $4 million that we get to use to offset our special education contribution. So with revenues and other sources, it's about $4.2 million for us. On the expenditure side, we have the salaries and benefits that were adjusted downward by $5 million. We have the increase in spending that we need in supplemental and concentration to align, to balance those resource codes. So that's that's a spending of $8.8 million. And then we need about $1.6 million for utilities. So that total on the spending side is an increase in spending of about $5.4 million. So an increase of revenue and sources of 4.2, an increase in spending and uses of 5.4. So that nets out to an impact to our bottom line of $1.2 million. So if we think about where we were with budget revisions number 1, and now where we are with budget revisions number 2, it's an additional hit of $1.2 million. Last thing I will note is there's still more budget revisions to come. As I noted in the memo, there's a couple of other things we're doing. So one, sort of an eye we're keeping out on this is just to be able to make budget development and refining and monitoring easier for us. And so we are finding ways of doing that within the system. And so that means doing things like taking some of the existing resources codes we have and eliminating them when we can, if they're not proving any notable purpose. In December, when we come back with first interim, we will have our revised LCFF calculation, and that's going to be a really important one because it's the primary basis for our revenue, of course. And we will be able to also show you that we've budgeted all of the carryover. So that $40 million that we saw in the restricted ending fund balance all gets budgeted. I think I noted before, sometimes it's a criticism of like, why did the budget go up so much? Why are we suddenly spending all these dollars? We're spending the dollars that we didn't spend last year, and they get allocated off to our school sites and get spent on our kids. With that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you for that thorough overview. Questions by the board at this time. Director Torres.
I only have one question, and I have a bunch of notes, but I might try to formulate some questions via email. In regard to 157 student increase and 10 FTE, it seems high. That's 15 students per person. Is there a particular area, if you have that information or you could get that? It's my understanding that Fremont High School, I don't know about Castlemont, but I know, speaking with the principal at Fremont, they had a huge increase in newcomers. And I think they even added another classroom. That's the biggest group growing, and that's the most expensive student to teach. So I'm just wondering, 157, 10 people, that's an interesting ratio. Do you know what that is?
So actually, I do not have the details on it, other than I know they're primarily at the secondary level. Sandra knows, so I will step aside.
After each time we do a count, we go through the staffing model at school sites that have been either increasing or decreasing in their teacher FTE. So if, as an example, you mentioned Fremont, we look at every school site that had an increase, and we work with the school leadership there to understand if they need an increase in their FTE and how much it is that they need. So you noted that there were, it's in terms of the ratio, it doesn't evenly spread out across the schools. And we did decide to invest in certain school sites that having a reduction, what we call a consolidation of a staff member, would result in multiple, for example, an elementary combination classroom. So a school site like Prescott, we decided not to do a consolidation there because it would result in combination classrooms all throughout their entire program. Same for Brookfield, and there was a short list of schools that we decided not to do a consolidation for because it would have such an impact on the instructional program. So we can't just slot students evenly, and it doesn't always even out. So sometimes we do have to make the decision to make a further investment in a school site, even though their actual enrollment doesn't warrant the number of FTEs that are at the school site.
So in regard to the 10, is there a weight as far as knowing where those 10 landed? Do you have an idea,
Yes.
category-wise?
What do you mean category-wise?
Well, for instance, you said it's not evenly distributed, which I assumed it wasn't evenly distributed across the district, but do you have, for instance, 3 at one particular school, 2 at another? I mean,
we do have the breakdown for specific sites that...
Could we get that in an email?
Sure, yes,
That'd
I
be
can
great.
provide
Thank
that to you.
I saw Director Yee first, and then Director Gonzalez.
Thank you. And I had the same question in the area that Director Torres did. So if it's 157 students distributed across the district, you could actually imagine that it would generate no additional teacher needs because they're filling vacancies here and there. And on the other hand, you might have some that you would fill. So then in the case that Dr. Aguilar mentioned, where you might want to add a faculty to mitigate small schools. I mean, this is a function of a small school requiring combination classes all along. How does the budgeting to the school come out then? Does the school's budget show that increase in staffing because you're actually overstaffing the school based upon their site budget? So how does it play out when you look at the school's budget? Does it show it as having a bonus, let's say? That's one question.
My understanding is it actually would show up as part of the school site budget, but...
But then that does get you an imbalance in the site budgets that we just have to recognize that some schools are going to be over budgeted for this very reason.
So just in the distribution of where the students were, the enrollment was slightly down in elementary. It was up significantly in middle school and up in high school as well. And so you're getting the net change there's 2 steps in the process in terms of balancing out the funding to school sites. And the first phase is really around staffing, and that's at the 20-day count. So a lot of the adjustments that Dr. Aguilera was talking about are really staffing adjustments that get made based on the contract at the 20-day. We're now going through a process of using the census day, which is the actual enrollment that goes to the state, to make adjustments. So for example, if you lost 2 or 3 students and if you were below a particular projection, you would lose a little bit of discretionary and a little bit of supplemental funding, right? If you happen to be a school that was slightly higher, we would make the adjustment towards the end of October to that school site to increase the funding in discretionary and supplemental. So there are 2 moving pieces to balance it out depending upon where the enrollment showed up.
Right. So as Director Torres said, and we've been told that to expect an influx of newcomers in this coming year, around which we may or may not have adequate ADA funding for because it's after the census. So do we have then a provision with this bonus, well, I would consider a bonus pot of 157 ADAs to actually designate some of that money for the purpose of staffing those schools which are anticipating the newcomers? Because I want to make sure that the school isn't penalized by having the space to open a newcomers class without some adequate funding. And so I'm just wondering if that's part of the calculation, because frankly, I'd rather have that money be reserved for that kind of anticipation than I would overstaffing a school that's small, because that's what gets us into a jam. In the long term, we end up with those extra teachers in schools which are not supported by their enrollment. That's question number 1. And question number 2 was around the supplemental concentration money. That was really provocative to me, because as you recall, the cuts we made in the end around foster youth and the ethnic support, you could make the argument that those are supplemental concentration programs which are rightly justified by that kind of funds. And I appreciate the fact that you're balancing the budget by using some of those unexpended expenditures, unexpected revenues to shift to balance the budget out of the regular funding. At the same time, if this is a consistent message, then it shows us a way to fund some of those critical services that we were looking at the end of the year that was so hard to cut, if you know what I mean, those funds that we ended up going to the county and state to do. So those are really my two questions. So if you could, like the newcomers part and then moving forward in the supplemental concentration.
I could start with the newcomer piece. So like Fremont's a great example. There's a high concentration of newcomers within the neighborhood. We actually budget out in all of our projections for school sites some late arriving newcomer seats. What ended up happening to Fremont was they filled their late arriving newcomer seats early because there were so many requests for that school. So then Fremont actually had the staff in place for the late arriving newcomers. Now we're at a place where there are more newcomers coming in and we have to find additional newcomers. Nicole Knight and her office have done a analysis of how much we recoup from the state, because we still do get funding for them as they come in. There's just a question about if they come in past the census day and the supplemental and concentration funding that we get. So we do get funding for them. I think the research study came up to about 88% of what we would have if they would have been there on the census day. So we do get funding in it, and we make those adjustments for the school sites. As to, is there? Once we realized, I think, almost by like the second or third week of school, that we had almost used all the 10th grade newcomer seats. We've been meeting on a weekly basis to kind of strategize and plan where to place newcomers, how to solve the dilemma that is coming. And this is a dilemma we're familiar with because it's happened maybe 3 years ago. Yeah, it was pretty significant. So exactly. So, and then
the supplemental concentration.
Exactly.
Concentration. I think I'll echo the point Ms. Aguilera made, that with the opportunity that is presented to us is with the upcoming 3-year LCAP, right? So it's essentially an opportunity to start all over again, figure out what the goals are, figure out what our intentions are, figure out the needs of our students, and then build a new LCAP that'll guide what we do and how we do it over the next 3 years.
Yeah, so I'm just saying this is kind of a hint. And then just my last one is, we've got a lot of our classes, I believe, still filled with substitutes. Don't we have don't we still have some positions that are unfilled? I think 30 or something like that. So are we budgeting for the fact that our expenditures are going to be lower right now because they're staffed by substitutes, but when we hire into those positions, there's going to be a jump in the budget? I'm sure this is a softball.
Yes, so we want to establish a budget and set dollars aside with that assumption that we're going to fill a position. We don't like to assume any savings in advance. And so we so long as we are posting a position and we're trying to fill it, we will budget 100% of what we're going to need for the balance of the school year.
Good.
Thank you. Director Gonzalez.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a question you can answer. It's maybe more for Dr. Aguilera. My question is about the 157, or just really the growth and enrollment period. Are you guys doing an analysis of where those students are coming from? And specifically, my question is, we've made some efforts to expand enrollment by expanding quality schools like Met West and CCPA. And are you guys doing an analysis of where students are coming from? Are those strategies working? And if they, period, I would love to get a report. I would love for the board to see a report, an analysis of whether those strategies are working. But I don't know if either of you wanted to speak to that right now.
It's a great question. We actually just a week ago convened with Sonali and the team from CCPA specifically, and I can get you the specific data, but one of the things is that the incoming 6th grade class is one of the places that's currently full. It's got 128 students in it, and the demand rate stayed at about the same, so they probably had about twice as many applications even for the seats. It is, in terms of the African American students that are in the incoming 6th grade class, is twice what the average was the previous couple of years. So we've done a lot, and a huge shout out to Jerome Gordine and Nicole Wiggins, who did a lot of work on the ground to outreach to African American families to invite them into the CCPA space. A lot of the Futures families that were at Futures did end up opting into CCPA as their first choice.
Other questions by board members about this item? Are there other questions? Vice President London.
This might be more for the superintendent, but I'm extremely interested and concerned about the rising utility costs, and I would like us to be able to receive a report on what's going on with the utility budget. I've been asking for many, many years now for year-over-year comparisons of our expenditures in the areas of electricity, natural gas, waste, and water. And if I was really going to have at it, I would add in fuel costs, but I'll leave you alone with that. But just getting those would be helpful. We installed solar several years ago. It was supposed to mitigate that. I would really like to understand why. I know that rates have been going up. So the question is, what are we doing to hedge against rising rate costs? Have we joined East Bay Community Energy, which is the new electricity provider for Alameda County in the city of Oakland? Just if you could address that. I see Mr. Nakatagawa is here to give me all the information I'm looking for.
Yes, so as you know, we've hired Brendan Havener-Dotton, ex-Bond Oversight Committee member, and he has extensive experience with PG&E on their efficiency programs with local governments. And so he is now helping us get back on track with having a good record of our energy consumption and getting all the data that you're talking about. We are serviced by East Bay Energy, and he has been meeting with them repeatedly about the program offerings they have and that they expect to be able to offer in the future.
Great. And I know you're aware of this, but just for the benefit of the everyone else, I've requested that the Facilities Committee receive a report on this at its January meeting. And any information we can get sooner than that would be most helpful. I also have some questions that are unrelated about backup generation that we can take up another time. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. I just have a couple questions that come also from a constituent email. We covered the 20-day count staffing extensively. This question is more detail around the revisions to revenue and other sources. So it says it was unclear if these were accounted for in the September 11th update when the unaudited were presented, and if it's included in the attached letter to ACOE that we approved in last meeting. So could you comment on whether or not the revisions, all the revisions for the revenue and other sources, if these are changes from the September 11th or these are in addition to?
They are in addition to, with that one special note I made about the special education early intervention preschool grant. The board had already approved that revision for the $4 million, but we had let it sit down as part of our ending fund balance. And now what the recommendation on the table is to go ahead and use that to offset the contribution we make towards our special education program.
Got it. Okay. And I know that you talked about supplemental concentration funds before, but just wanting to make clear. So it talks about it, the S&C funds being out of balance at the adopted budget with the $8.8 million in expenditures required for the LCAP requirement. So does the $8.8 million represent a commitment of additional expenditures by OUSD this fiscal year, or a recharacterization of planned expenditures, or some combination of both?
So it is $8.8 million that was included in the LCAP and not in our budget, and now it would be included in our budget so that the LCAP and the budget are aligned and match.
So so there's no changes in terms of what the commitments for the 8.8 is for?
Right. So if we look at the LCAP sort of as our base of what we intend to do with our supplemental concentration dollars, this is fulfilling doing what we said we were going to do in our LCAP.
Okay, so it was included in the LCAP, but it was not included in the adopted budget.
Right.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that clarification. And just in terms of next steps, before we move on, there was a lot of questions also that I heard about budget development, timeline, and wanting to make sure we got an earlier start on that process. Sounds like that's going to come to the November 5th Budget and Finance Committee meeting, as well as I know there's been questions in the past about the commitments and the resolutions about sending funds back to school sites. I know that is agendized also for November 5th, the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, as well as some other items. So I know that those two items, which are of particular interest, will be discussed at Budget and Finance before it comes back to the full board later in this year. And then, of course, we'll have the next update at our first interim in December. Great. Thank you very much. We'll now take public comment on this item. I see Ms. Stelton already at the podium. If there's other speakers that are wanting to speak on this item, please go ahead and line up. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So a couple of years ago, one of the things that in my view was very positive that the superintendent asked for was the monthly update on the budget. And that was in response to budgetary issues that had happened. What we have tonight on these two pieces of paper is not a budget update, it's a list of budget issues. And I'm extremely disappointed that when I walked in tonight and when I checked online, there were no charts that would show how does this impact the bottom line. The public would like to know, and I mean no disrespect at all to Ms. Casares' expertise, but the public would like to know. We'd also like to know your 20-day count numbers and the seabeds numbers. And you have those now. It is it is October 23rd, and you've had those 4 weeks. I appreciated Dr. Aguilera's clarification around some of the staffing issues. The public would also like to know, where is the staffing going and where are the students showing up? So I'm extremely disappointed, as are a number of people that I've been talking to, about what is being provided to the public. I tell my students every day that when you have a conversation, the person you need to think of is your listener, and making sure your listener is the one who understands. We don't feel that you're communicating with us in this way.
Thank you, Ms. Dalton.
Of life. It is reflected in the annual report of Oakland Promise that since 2016, the school board, or USD, I'm sorry, has been contributing $1.5 million annually to Oakland Promise. On Monday of this week, the city of Oakland revealed that because Oakland Promise does not have, since 2016, they're claiming they have one now, but it's not legitimate. They are not a 501c3. My question to you is this: have you been making contributions to Oakland Promise, and what amount of money have you given them? And have you determined it to be a legitimate process? Yes or no? Excuse me, I can't hear anybody. Hello? Okay, silence
Thank
is the
you.
answer. You have been illegitimately given money to Oakland Promise since 2016, and you need to correct that.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Okay, speaking as an individual, is that when you have consultant, and the consultant has the information, how they interact with the bureaucracy, the staff, because you have a website and you look at the numbers, and if the consultant isn't communicating the updated numbers to whoever responsible for retaining the website, how many are enrolled, those numbers just stay the same month after month. There's no out and keeping transparent to the public. And it's a problem because the consultant has a contract and they just do what they do, but how do you interface with the that's the question.
Thank you, Mr. Mordecai.
Mike Hutchinson. It's great that school board members ask questions of the consultant, who is now the CFO, but to ask them to answer your questions by sending you an email does not provide those answers to the community. So we've set up this system now, as I'm looking at an empty dais here, where the school board intentionally tries to prevent reporting to the community, intentionally doesn't want to engage the community. You know, for these budget things, to hear that there's 10 extra FTEs, that means enrollment went up this year. Well, I remember getting into arguments with board members about whether we have declining enrollment or not. We don't. Just like I got in arguments about whether we had a structural deficit or not. We don't. So again, your first revision should be to return the $3 million to our school sites. But you haven't done that yet. And then when we have a meeting like this tonight, how much did this extra security cost? How much did it cost to bring 10 police cars and a helicopter? And where does that fit into the budget? If you really wanted to solve this budget, you'd have a community engagement with the 5 of us sitting here now. You put the 5 of us in a room with anyone, we'll be able to hammer out a good plan for the budget because we understand what's going on. Clearly, the school board doesn't. This is so beyond, just so far beyond. And I hope you're starting to realize that the house of cards you've built over the last 8 years is quickly crumbling to the ground. Because the community will not fall for this fake news anymore, and your time is coming.
Eric Pettengill, Oakland teacher, Oakland parent and resident. Your mismanagement is on full display. You continue to put forth votes on topics that you don't have the proper information available to the public for you to even be making those decisions on. So to continue to push forward these plans on school closures and to many of these budget decisions that you're making when we still haven't seen much of this information clearly made available to the public is just a travesty. I think it's a shame that this is the state we're in, where most of the public does not trust you and does not trust the superintendent's vision and does not trust the board to hold the superintendent to account as they should, not asking a consultant about what we should be doing with this money, because you still haven't been able to manage your internal structures to get someone in these positions who will actually meet the needs of Oakland students and Oakland families. So I just think it's atrocious that we're continuing to see you vote on things where you don't even necessarily seem to know what you're voting on. We certainly don't, because you haven't made this information publicly available.
Thank you. All right, does not appear that there's any additional public comment on this item. We will move on to item T3 and T4. Item T3 is also a Facilities Committee item. I will turn it over to the chairperson of the Facilities Committee, which is Jody London, to introduce this item. But before I do that, I will take a motion to adopt item T.-3.
Move adoption.
Moved by Director Gonzalez. Is there a second? Seconded by, I believe it was Director Torres. Chairperson and Vice President London, can you take us through this item?
Sure. So at the end of the legislative session, the legislature passed AB 48, and the governor signed AB 48, which means that the state in, I believe, isn't this the state, this, oh, this is our bond measure, my bad, excuse me. This is a resolution, a recommendation from the Facilities Committee for our board. I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback in the microphone. For our board to begin the planning that we need to bring forward a 2020 bond. So this is a companion to the item we had earlier in the evening, and the resolution directs the Facilities Committee to bring forward final bond language, including an amount sought and a master plan no later than May of 2020. I will note anecdotally that we expect to have the facilities master plan, as you heard earlier, available sooner than May, and that the board is directing the Facilities Committee to seek input from the Citizen Bond Oversight Committee before it brings anything to the board. And then that we also, and this is important, you've heard me talk about this before, explore the feasibility of a companion parcel tax measure that would create a stable funding source for our custodians. As we've heard earlier, that's an ongoing issue. So that's what's in this resolution. And thank you for the seconds. This is moved to you unanimously from the Facilities Committee.
Any questions by board members on this item? No? It sounds like it was also discussed at the Facilities Committee, so perhaps a lot of comments happened there. Let's move on to public comment on this item if there's no board comments at this time. This would be public comments on T.-3. Mr. Mordecai, go ahead.
Mordecai, speaking as an individual, chutzpah, exactly, asking for a parcel tax on top of a additional bond funding. At the same meeting that the school board votes overwhelmingly, I couldn't follow it, so I don't know if anybody didn't vote for it. Obviously, the majority voted for on the 4 items to use Measure J money, bond funding money, to misuse it and to continually misuse it. I mean, it is really not beyond chutzpah. I don't know what the Jewish word is for it, but there's got to be, I think the American word is stupid. It's a stupid idea to go ahead and misspend bond money and turn around at the same meeting and ask the public to spend money for the bond money and then add a parcel tax. Right after AA stirred everybody up over the failure of AA to try to say, oh, folks, we're not going to go with the two-thirds, we're going to go with the majority. So you have.
Oh. Thank you, Mr. Mordecai. We're going to move on to the next speaker now.
Is the mic on now? Thank you. Eric Pettengill, Oakland parent, Oakland resident, teacher, Oakland teacher. This is absurd. This is just absurd. Jody London has been on this board as long as some of the other members here who have overseen the mismanagement of this district for the last several years. She's been a part of this. So the fact that you're now asking or planning to ask this school district, these residents, to give you more money is absurd. The last two measures that went through in the law gave money to charters, which I'm wondering about whether or not that discussion took place in this idea of getting a parcel tax. Speaking to what other commenters have already stated, which is the continued mismanagement of other funds. Jody London and many of the board members who are up here, pre-Kyla and pre some of these other members, watched as many years went by where Measure G, I believe, and certainly Measure J, funds never had a quorum. Nobody was overseeing those funds. Nobody was minding the store. That's been going on for years, and you're continuing to do it now by assuming that you might ask Oakland for more money when you still have not, again, your grand jury report response was not sufficient. The mismanagement of this district is what you need to fix. Asking for more money is not the answer.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Love life. I can't count the number of times I had come to this body and requested you to stand up and acknowledge that Measure AA was voter fraud, to do something about the illegitimacy of Oakland Promise, and you said nothing. And because of that, you're part of the anger and the frustration with the voters around any more supporting of partial tax. Do you know the city is trying to do more parcel taxes as well? The library wants parcel tax. The Parks and Recreation wants parcel tax on the ballot. Do you know that people are angry about the vacancy tax, $6,000 for vacant property? People are mad about Measure KK, where we were told that the money would be used to fix the sidewalks, and they just passed an ordinance saying that property owners are responsible for their sidewalks and lawsuits. There are so many innumerable things that voters are angry about misrepresentation of measures on the ballot. And your measures, I just found out tonight about Measure J, how you're using it to put services of electrical connections at 1000 Broadway, which is not school facilities.
Thank you.
So put something on the ballot if you're that bold. But you cannot be that unaware that the voters are not going to vote for any more parcel taxes.
Thank you. Any other speakers for this item? All right, Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call on T.-3? Oh, okay. Hold on. Mr. Hutchinson, go ahead.
Thank you. So now for the 4 community members that are here, I just want to point out again, just like at the last board meeting, police and security outnumbers the community by over 2 to 1 now in this room. And not once have you come downstairs to check to make sure everyone was okay, to see who was here, let alone to restart your meeting down there.
Do you want to speak to the item? Because it's going to take time away from it.
This has been a long night. I am speaking on the issues at hand. This is the issue, because how can we engage with this exact item when we can't even hear down here? when we can't see you and participate and watch your conversation going back and forth? And then you had the charter school folks allowed upstairs. They're not media. They're not district staff. Why were they allowed upstairs? I signed up to speak 2 days ago. Teachers are staff members. Why weren't they allowed upstairs? These meetings have been highly illegal, and some of you need to be aware that we now have a video of one of our teachers from Kaiser being thrown down to the ground by OUSD PD at this meeting. And I just looked at the bruise on her arm 20 minutes ago. That is what you have done as a school board. There's going to be some serious repercussions for you calling OPD and sending your police out against us. I'm furious at the OUSD PD chief who called OPD for mutual support. It was obviously a setup that 10 cars and a helicopter
Hutchinson,
got here in 2 minutes.
You're not speaking to the item, and your time
wait,
has now
so
elapsed.
there's nothing
Okay.
that says you get to decide what the item is.
Thank you. Any other speakers? If there's no other speakers, Mr. Rickshaw, we'll take a roll call, please.
On the roll call to adopt T.-3. Somebody else have a microphone? Okay. Director Hinton Hodge? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Director Harris? Yes. Director Yee?
Yes.
Director Gonzalez?
Yes.
Director Torres?
Yes.
Vice President London?
Yes.
President Ng?
Yes.
The motion is adopted unanimously.
Thank you. We're moving on to item T.-4. This also comes out of the Facilities Committee, so I will turn it over to Vice President London as soon as I take a motion in a second. Is there a motion to adopt item T.-4?
I will move this.
Moved by Vice President London.
Second.
Seconded by Director Gonzalez.
Great, thank you. This is, I'm sorry, this is the item we were starting to talk about. The legislature passed AB 48 at the end of the session, and the governor signed it. So the March 2020 state ballot is going to include a $15 billion, let me get my numbers right, school facilities bond. It's very broad ranging. My read of it is that there's quite an upside for Oakland, and I think it would be very helpful for us to lend our support to this effort. This has passed, coming to you unanimously from the Facilities Committee.
Great. Director Gonzalez.
Vice President Linden, my understanding from previous bond measures is that we must contribute in order to qualify for this measure. Is that correct?
The way these state bonds work, the state allocation board has a process where you basically get reimbursed. So you do your project, you submit your application, and then, and Mr. Nakatagawa will correct me if I'm wrong, and then you get your funding and you get additional credits for certain things. So in the past, we've received several $1 million when the state was providing matching grants for doing green school construction and so on. But can you explain the process a little more?
The local match requirement. All state bonds since my time here, which is quite a while ago, have required a local match for construction funding, generally in the realm of 40%, sometimes 50%. So that thereby requires us to have some local funding to match that.
Right. So just to be clear, if our facilities program is to go away, we will not be eligible to apply for state bond funds. Is that correct?
The only program which we would be eligible for would be what they call hardship, which is a very minimally funded program by the state and has very strict requirements.
Other questions by board members? Nope. Okay. If there's no further questions, we'll move on to public comment at this time. Public comment on item T.-4.
It's not on, and now it's on. Love Life. I think when you get to item T5, it's going to really support why people are not going to be able to vote for anything in this district, because T5 speaks to how you've mishandled bonds according to the performance audit that was done on the handling of bonds. So the thing that might be saving you is this is a statewide ballot, and they have reduced the requirements for approval from 2/3 to 55%. And it's unfortunate because this would help with school facilities, public preschool, college health, and safety. And so you have messed up because you haven't been able to stand up when things were being done wrong around measures in this city. And because of that, there are consequences. And lastly, you have lost the support of the community. I'm standing behind a barricade, and you want me to walk to the ballot box to support anything you have to do in this city? I'm behind a barricade, and I'm supposed to vote for something? I don't think so. And I will speak to this every chance I get. I will tell every voter why they should.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Jim Mordecai speaking as an individual. I second what's saying is that you got to get your act together. Or this is something I want to see passed, but it's not going to benefit the students of Oakland because you fouled it up, you screwed it up, you messed it up so bad that the voters are eventually going to be awoke. They're going to see that they can't do what the inclination is. And everybody's inclination is to support children. But then when you take the money and mishandle it, they're going to say enough is enough. And there is the AAA. It wasn't you. It was the city that screwed up on that. But AAA is saying, hey, parcel tax is poison. It won't pass, and it's your legacy.
Mike Hutchinson, more than it not passing, you know, the other problem we have is we just had a legal interpretation of this new assembly bill given by a school board member and the OUSD architect, where they said, oh, they think this is how it's been done in the past. That's not a legal opinion. That's not an opinion on what this actually does. So you don't know what this bill will do. And the discussion you just had, you don't know if it requires matching funds. Some of you might think so, but that's not a real legal opinion. And at the same time, what we're talking about here is more money for facilities, particularly early childhood facilities. So why, at the same time, are you planning on selling 4 CDCs? Why are you, at the same time, closing schools because you say you don't have enough money for the upkeep of them when you know that there's more money coming in? And all at the same time that you still haven't done a master's facilities list. Cognitive dissonance, failure by design, and we will erase the board.
Thank you.
Eric Pettengill, Oakland resident, parent, Oakland teacher. Nobody trusts you. Nobody trusts you, especially people like Vice President London, who's been there for years, watching this mismanagement for years. Gary Yee coming back to further agendas that I don't understand and to vote for things that I think are in the not in the interest of Oakland students. So when this kind of money comes along, when the state's going to drop $15 billion, a chunk of change of which will come into your laps, just like all those matching federal funds that come in that you mismanage, we want to know what's going to happen. The facilities plan is a mess. Measure J in particular, it took several years, for example, to even get a surveyor out to Edna Brewer to do the one of the line items in the legislation, which was to build them a field. And that took years to happen because you all didn't do these facilities plans, not effectively, because of this lack of leadership.
Thank you. Your time is now elapsed. All right, we're ready for a roll call, Mr. Rakeshaw.
Okay. Director Hinton Hodge.
Yes.
Okay. Director Yee.
Yes.
Director Torres.
Abstain.
Director Gonzalez.
Yes.
All right. Director Harris, not in the room. Director London.
Yes.
Vice President London.
Yes.
And President Ng.
Yes.
Motion's adopted.
Thank you. So the next item comes to us from the Measure ABJ Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. We had the chair who was here earlier in the evening. Due to the disruption, she... Oh, okay. Oh, this is a joint report by the Facilities Committee and the Measure ABJ Bond Oversight Committee. The chairperson for the Bond Oversight Committee was here earlier in the evening. Unfortunately, she's unable to join us now due to some of the disruption, but I believe Director London, who chairs the Facilities Committee, does have some comments from the Bond Oversight Committee that she can share on her behalf.
I'd like to provide that later. I think we should talk about the item first.
Yeah.
So I mean,
that's right. So for item T.-5, I'll turn it over to Chairperson London, who can introduce the item. This is not a voting item. This is an item that we are receiving an update on.
Right. So the Facilities Committee received a report on this, on the audit. This is a performance audit for the 17-18 school year. And we had a report on this at the Facilities Committee meeting. Our state trustee wanted to make sure that we heard this item tonight, which is why we're hearing this tonight. And I'm going to ask Mr. Nakatagawa if he can again give us an overview. Basically, the performance audit outlines a number of areas where the auditor recommends that we change our practice. So when you look in the cover memo, you'll see that staff wants to come back to us with further information, but I believe that it would be helpful for us to hear right now where staff is in their initial work to respond to the audit. Thank you, Mr. Nakatagawa, for being here.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address you regarding our audit. Excuse me. The Measure J performance audit performed this last school year by Moss Adams, yes, has an extensive number of issues and potential findings that they say we need to pay attention to, and we are taking this very seriously and are prioritizing the systematic issues that they raise in terms of making sure that we're doing everything with advice from legal counsel in terms of funding sources and eligible expenditures, updating our procedures manual to be in compliance with current board policy and public contract law, and as well as developing a better and more robust project management software system so that we're able to track and record our actions in a less labor-intensive fashion, so that it doesn't take us as much staff time to report on these elements.
Board members, do you have any questions on Director Gonzalez?
Thanks for that report. What I haven't seen, and I don't know if this is something Facilities Committee has talked about, is an actual plan about, so for each of the observations from the auditors, so here's a couple that I'm particularly concerned about. Payment controls, I think that's observation 4.1. Change order reporting, that's observation 3.2. The revisions to projects, that's observation 3.1. Are you all planning to write a plan that would let the board see a timeline about when you guys are expecting to actually address each of these concerns and what the specific strategy is for addressing them?
Yes, that's what we're working on presently, and we will be prepared to present a comprehensive plan. I'm not ready to give you a date yet, but we're going to be starting to address that at the next facilities committee with some attention on lessons learned and the first rollout of specific responses.
Okay, and are there specific observations from the report that you guys are planning to tackle first?
There's quite a number that we're working on simultaneously. I can't really give you, I'd have to go back to my notes and figure out which ones we're actually ready to address now.
Okay, do you have a rough estimate, like by the end of the school year, by March, when you guys are planning to bring your plan to the board?
So absolutely by the end of the school year. By next March, we'll have our next audit in place, so that will also give us some feedback on areas that we didn't make sufficient improvement over this last year. So that will be an additional tool to help us focus any additional work.
Director Yee.
Thanks, Director Gonzalez, thanks for the question, because in the Facilities Committee, we asked Mr. Nakagawa to work with his staff to agendize and calendar some of there's many items on here, and it's really important for us to have some dates so they can break it up into the priority items as you're recommending. Because we have the General Counsel here, an item did come up at the Facilities Committee, which I was interested in. There was the performance audit by Moss Adams, and they identified in many cases the failure to find a document or something like that. So there's quite a few in that spirit, and there's some belief that all of the items have to be addressed in some way. So if the item is reported as not having been found, then is the staff actually required to go find it, or to understand that, acknowledge that it wasn't found, and that's the resolution of it, because we're coming up on another audit, and having gone through this stream of audits from 2008 to 2012 on our overall budget, you can either choose to spend all your time correcting the audit findings, even though they're 2 years behind, or you can put in place the kinds of things you're talking about, which is prioritizing the things that are going to make the system better, with the understanding that the new audit coming up is going to address those things. So that's the part that I'm a little bit confused about, and it would help us to provide direction to the Facilities Committee to see what does it mean to actually address it, because this also came up at the Bond Oversight Committee. One of the commissioners had a list of multiple items that he wanted that were pretty microscopic, in my view, about finding the validation and verification of. And either it was or it wasn't. I don't feel any better whether they found it or they didn't find it, because the auditor didn't find it. So I would rather our staff not labor that kind of technical response and really look at them. So in respect for Mr. Nakagawa's work and the staff, if you look at we have a document now, and I think it's the one we published. At the back of it, they did have a spreadsheet which says they'll consider this. And so I've asked them to prioritize those to the ones that they actually feel are going to make the systems better for the upcoming audit, and not worry about the rest. But that's why when I saw Mr. Daniels here, I wanted to comment on that, on the audit finding dilemma.
So I'm going to give Mr. Daniels a chance to speak, but I want to point out that one of the resources we're going to use is the auditor for the 18-19 fiscal year in terms of getting their feedback on, appropriate and best responses and how to prioritize that.
Great. Thank you, Director Yi, Josh Daniels, General Counsel. So when an audit finding simply says no documents, that's the audit finding. That's what they found. And then we and staff get to respond in whatever way we deem appropriate, perhaps looking at our record retention, perhaps maybe there was no documents because, in some districts, there are, depending on how old the records they're looking for are, they could have been destroyed or lost, or, it just sort of depends on the situation. I will say, to your point, the way that an audit works is it oftentimes is and feels 2 years behind. So a performance audit identifies something that you might want to correct. You are already in the next year when you identify it. And so the audit for that year, which then comes the following year, it may not have been corrected for because you have to put new processes in place. And so typically, an audit finding is not seen in a new audit as corrected until 2 years afterwards, because the next year there's not enough time to make that correction and to see it in the audit. So, I do believe, in terms of what you just said, that there's a focus on moving forward and not so much a need to focus on the minutia from a past audit, but looking at moving forward, what if anything is appropriate to do differently in light of the performance audit findings.
Well, I do believe that the Facilities Committee really wants to have the facilities, the disposition of the audit findings and the bond done better and done more effectively and meeting the standards. And so that's the standard that I really want to reinforce, is our goal in this whole thing in an audit is to improve performance. It's not to raise a grade from a D to a C plus or something like that.
Right, but if we get another audit report like this next year, it's really going to undermine the trust of voters and our credibility, right? So both things are important. We can't have the same findings again, and they have to fix the systems issues.
And to that end, we've already had discussions with with Luz and the other staff, and about having upfront engagement with the auditing firm at the start of their contract, so that there's better communications between the facilities team and the auditors, as there was in years past.
Director Torres. So I'm just going to read a quick portion of what was going to be stated by the person from the Oversight Committee. And in particular, I find this to be something that is important for this board to understand when the answers are going to come. And in particular, 2 areas of the Audit Committee report, the auditor, Moss Adams, that was unfortunately terminated, and not terminated in a way that was very well-founded. But nonetheless, sections 2 and 3 are what was most concerning to the CBOC, about staff saying the auditors are wrong in their observation, and it has documentation to prove it. And so, according to Ed Code 15280, the governing board of the district should provide the Citizens Oversight Committee with responses to all findings, recommendations, concerns. So when would that information that actually proves that they were wrong be provided, is one question. And then the other issue they were asking about, or she was asking about, is Section 3, where staff stated that they will consider or agree with recommendations. CBOC wants quarterly updates. So they're spending a lot of time, and when I've gone to the meetings, they've asked facilities staff for the same thing, and there's like a run-on meeting that I'm at. It was the 4th month of asking for him to get stuff, and nothing. And then the following month I went, and he still had nothing. So I think that's the gist of this email from the leader of CBOC, which is there's a lot of wasted time at their meetings asking staff, did you bring all the stuff you promised the last 5 meetings? So ultimately, it is concerning about the termination of the auditor, and I hear you saying the communication will be better, but I think furthermore, it should be finishing what was started with Moss Adams, not starting anew, such that, as we just heard our general counsel say, it's already behind, so we don't have time, in my opinion, to say we're just going to start new, because are we going to fire them in the future too? That could be possible, so I don't think that's appropriate. So I'm just reading what was sent to me and what I agree with and what I experienced going to some of these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Torres. Other comments at this time? Director Harris, no. Vice President London?
I
Okay.
have a comment.
Director Hinton-Hodge, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I mean, just based on like the last comments by the directors, I just continually I'm disturbed by the level of micromanagement and authority and just kind of privilege that the committee has been given. While appreciating their volunteerism and their work, I think that there still continues to be a distinguishing factor around whether or not they can direct our staff or not, because it clearly is a level of frustration for them for year after year. They feel like they're not getting what they need, but on the other hand, and this is probably to the superintendent, really kind of assessing what is an appropriate, at times ask for information. And our staff has the authority to be the one that engages in the contracts and make those decisions. And so, once again, like they are skilled in that way, in ways that we aren't necessarily, or even our volunteers aren't. So that's just one thing that continues to kind of disturb me. The other piece, and this is going back to the audit being 17-18, and not to make too many excuses, but I do feel like I would like to get a sense of context, because I feel like that was a moment when leadership was really different inside the facilities department. And so wanting to really think about, as we do move forward, what is the capacity of our facilities department? Do we have steady legal counsel available? There's, who are staffing? When we've kind of gotten into this space right now where we were, not having as much resource because allowing our bond to kind of run out, right? That impacted, I think, staffing in some kind of way. So just kind of want to look at what kind of infrastructure we actually support for facilities department to actually be pretty healthy. Because I know for me, in the last 10 years that I've been here, it has not had the same type of issues. And then the very last thing is I would like to better understand things like contracting. I'm sorry, I lost it. It was we were just change orders. Like those kinds of things that are, I feel like that those are factors that are related to who we contract with, and who's doing the work. And so I would like to get a better understanding of that. And again, not to disparage any contractors or anything like that, but just want to understand better, like a practice that may find ourselves constantly doing work change orders based on how we do design and build, or so what are those practices that we may want to look at that would be really different in our contracting process? Because I think that it's not really us doing something incorrect. It's actually the relationship with the contractor as well, because we don't do change orders, they do. So I hope that that's kind of clear in terms of like moving forward. I would like to see it be, tighter, but I'd also like for us to do a better assessment of all the multiple factors, of what are those barriers. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Hinton-Hodge. Vice President London, did you have further comments on this item?
I had been thinking that I would share the comments from our Citizen Bond Oversight Committee chair, but Director Torres addressed that, those issues. The bottom line, I think, from the bond committee is they would like to have more information more timely, and I think the audit pushes us in that direction, And I am looking forward to the conversations that we'll be having that will lead to process improvement in our facilities department and in the management of our bond, because that's really what this is about, is how do we get better. An audit isn't necessarily a bad thing. A performance audit should be viewed, as I understand it, as an opportunity for some critical thinking and suggestions on how you can do things better. We all have opportunity to improve. So I really welcome the conversation with our staff and with our audit team and others to move this forward. Thanks.
Thank you. And it sounds like this will continue to be part of a discussion in terms of facilities committee oversight, is what I was hearing from some of the earlier comments. And I believe the facilities committee just met last Friday, but they do meet on a monthly basis. Is that right? Yes. Director London, do you know when the next facilities committee is?
The next meeting is, I believe, on November 18th. No, excuse me, November 15th.
November 15th. Great. Thank you very much. All right, we'll take public comment on this item. I see Mr. Hutchinson already up there. Mr. Hutchinson, go ahead.
It's very disappointing to hear board members who at the least have been on the school board for 5 years claim that they need more understanding about how this works. You know, I live in the Glenview neighborhood. After Glenview Elementary was destroyed with a Measure J project, we've been looking at a pile of dirt now for 4 years. That project is now coming in at twice the projected cost. Same thing with Foster Kitchen. This same school board actually paid Lance Jackson $30,000 a month and made him interim head of facilities and allowed him to manage Measure J. Where's the discussion about how you squandered that money? Gary Yee, Director Yee, when he was interim superintendent, reprioritized the Measure J spending. I would hope that he would understand how this works, since he's the one who changed the priorities for funding in the first place. And it is inappropriate for a school board director to give the report on behalf of the head of the Citizens Oversight Committee. And the reason she's not here and had to leave is not because of any action from the community. It's because the school board went upstairs and told everyone there'd be no public comments, so people went home.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson.
You are in violation of
your time is now elapsed. Next speaker, please.
The other thing is, I know how the
Next
bylaw...
speaker, please. So, Mr. Hutchinson, your time is now elapsed. If you continue to stay there, we're not going to be able to hear the public comments of the individuals who are behind you. Okay. Here's shaking of head. It sounds like they do not want to have public comment. Uh-huh. Yeah, could we scan out to see if there's anyone else that would like to take public comment at this time? Okay, it does look like there's additional individuals that would like to take public comment. Unfortunately, Mr. Hutchinson, could you please move to the side so that we could hear from the additional speakers? Mr. Hutchinson, can you please move to the side so we can hear from the additional speakers? We've already heard from you. Mr. Hutchinson, as long as you're standing at the podium, we're going to be unable to hear from the speakers behind you. We've already heard from you on this item. If you continue to stay there, Mr. Hutchinson, we're going to have to move on to the next item without hearing from public comment of the individuals behind you. All right, so if you continue to stay there, then we are going to move on to the next item. Unfortunately, that does not provide an opportunity for the individuals behind you to have an opportunity to speak. Mr. Hutchinson, are you going to move to the side to allow an opportunity for the individuals behind you to speak?
All I was trying to finish pointing out, thank you for turning the mic back on, is board by...
Mr. Hutchinson, your time has elapsed. We gave you more than a minute to complete your comments. And so at this time, we're not going to allow you to continue to speak at this time. So if you can please move to the side so the individual behind you could speak, that would be a courtesy to the three other individuals who would like to speak. If you don't move to the side, then we're not going to be able to hear from the individuals behind you. We're going to have to go on to the next meeting. It's your choice, Mr. Hutchinson. All right, if you continue to stay there, we're going to have to move on. All right, so we're going to have to move on. I apologize to the individuals who are behind Mr. Hutchinson. Okay. All right, go ahead to the next speaker. No, Mr. Hutchinson, we're not going to hear from you at this time. We are not.
Just keep going. That's it.
All right. So we're going to move on at this time. I apologize to the three individuals behind you who have not had the opportunity to speak on this item. We are going to have to move on because we've already heard from Mr. Hutchinson at this time, and he's not stepping to the side to allow the additional comments from other individuals speak. So is there a motion to adopt item T.-6, which is approval of the application for a provisional
Move adoption.
Moved by Director Gonzalez. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Director Harris. I see you downstairs. We have moved on to the next item. Unfortunately, we have closed public comment for that item. So we are on T.-6. We have a motion and a second. Are there board member comments on this item? Seeing none, we are now taking public comment on this item, T.-6. All right.
Please.
Go ahead.
I did not get to speak to the previous public comment.
Unfortunately, I did
That's
several
not unfortunate
calls.
because that's not how the Brown rules work.
I gave several warnings.
You are not the arbiter of how this meeting is run. You are the president. You are supposed to facilitate this meeting and encourage public comment and encourage this to happen.
Okay, did
not
you want to
stop
speak
it
on
from
this
happening.
item?
I have a couple of other comments that I was not allowed to make that I would like to make. May I do that now, please?
Fortunately, we are on item T.-6. This is not the time to make comments on those items. I provided ample opportunity for there to be comments on the last item.
You did not provide ample opportunity.
Unfortunately, there was another member of the community that blocked the opportunity for other.
No, you're choosing. I'm
speak.
just imagining all these minutes we're spending here. Hearing you say thank you and so forth, rather than just giving us the time. Okay. Oh, you started my time. Okay, I guess my.
All right. Is there any other public? Does the individual behind you, would you like to speak on item T.-6? All right, if you're not going to allow, at this time, if there are anybody else that is here to speak to item T.-6, this would be the time that we would be hearing from them. Unfortunately, we are unable to. We have someone. All right.
It's getting late. Everybody's getting crazy.
Okay. Yeah. So it does not appear anybody else is here to speak on T.-6. I see you. I see you making your gestures. We did provide opportunities for you to try to speak on this item. We did not hear you speaking on this item, and your minute has far elapsed. Okay, so if you can move to the side, we can hear from the next person if they're here to speak on T.-6. All right. All right, let's call a roll call for T.-6. If you can stand to the side, the individual behind you can speak to this item. But yes, hi, are you here to speak on T.-6?
You know I'm not here to speak on T.-6. I'm here to do my public.
I would like to speak to T.-6 since I was denied that time.
He was denied the time. This is bullshit. You guys are so full of shit.
Please don't swear. Please don't swear on this network. Are you here to speak on this item or not? Otherwise, we're going to have to move on. All right. Okay. So we are going to move on for a roll call at this time.
On the call of the roll for item T. Dot. Oh, okay.
Ms. Olabaya, are you here to speak on T.-6?
I am here
okay.
to speak on T.6.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
T.6 calls for intern permits so that teachers can be credentialed to teach in the school district. I think it is wrong for you to grant permits to teachers to come into this district when you know you do not respect anything around teaching and education. So you should vote no. Do not grant any permits for anybody to come teach in this district. When you have a dysfunctional system, when you have the inability to respect the parents, the community, the teachers, the children, no, they should not be given a permit. It's a disservice for them to come into this process. I did not get to speak on T5. And you don't respect my right. I'm behind a barricade with people watching me. How many times you gonna disrespect me? How many times do I have to come up here and be disrespected?
Thank you.
But I'm gonna keep coming back.
Your time has elapsed. Thank you. All right. I'm sorry, sir. We gave you ample time to speak on this item, so we will not. We're going to move on now. We gave you ample time to speak on this item earlier. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call for T.-6?
Yes, on the roll call for T.-6, Director Hinton Hodge. Director Hinton Hodge.
I abstain.
Okay. Director Harris. Director Yee.
Yes.
Director Gonzalez.
Yes.
Director Torres. Vice President London. President Ng.
Yes.
The motion is adopted.
Thank you. We're now on T.-7. Is there a motion to approve?
Move adoption.
Item T.-7. Moved by Director Gonzalez. Is there a second? Seconded by Director Torres. Any board questions on this item? Public comment on T.-7. All right.
Is this on now? Thank you for actually allowing me to speak to the point. These are all connected. So I will comment on T7 in that I agree with the previous speaker's points, although I disagree with about the ask for a no. The shame is that you continue to have to do this over and over again, year after year, for dozens and dozens of teachers, waiving tests, waiving credentials because of this board's mismanagement and inability to actively recruit and retain and pay teachers adequately, which speaks to T5 and the mismanagement. So, if you want to know why we're here speaking to this point, is because your mismanagement of funds, like mentioned in the audit, the 9% of sampled expenditures that were considered unallowable by the bond language. The fact that you acknowledge in 3.2 that your financial reporting is lacking adequate details for key stakeholders to analyze the schedule and budgetary information. Those kinds of findings in a report like T5, in the earlier agenda item I did not get to speak to, this is why we don't trust you.
Thank
and
you.
This is why you have to continue to waive.
Thank you. Other comments for T.-7?
You know me, I'm going to say what the hell I want to say.
No, we're
You
taking comments
people-
for T.-7 at this time. If you're not
You know
able
what?
to speak
I
to
never
this comment.
got to speak on my public comments. You just whisked me by, and that's not fair.
Okay, if you're here to speak on T.-7, you can do so now. If not, we're going to move on to the next speaker.
What happened to my public comment?
That comes up at the end when you let them know.
We have another opportunity to do public comment on non-agenda items at the end of the meeting. That's the next item.
Whatever. I can't, woman,
All right, next speaker.
Okay.
I can't stand you.
Go
I'ma
ahead.
tell you, vote her ass out amongst all you motherfuckers.
All right.
Language.
Next speaker, please. I'd like to remind everyone
Wow.
this is broadcast
Inappropriate.
publicly. We do have children and others that do listen to these board meetings. Go ahead. Please restart the time to 1 minute. Go ahead.
Love life. This is so disgraceful. It is so inappropriate dealing with the issues of how many children are performing at such a low level, and to have the capacity to arrange for waivers, which means that people are coming into the system who are not qualified, are not certified to be in the classroom. And that's what you're doing with this item. You're putting unqualified, uncertified individuals in the classroom and to deal with helping children to reach their fullest potential. And it doesn't work that way. How do we get to this point that we have a system that says we will waive the necessity to have qualified and credentialed individuals in the classroom? But we do it every meeting. And this is another example of the dysfunctionality of the system not working for children.
Thank you. Any other speakers at this time? We're on item T.-7. All right. Seeing none, Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. On the roll call for the item stated by.
I'm sorry, can I make a comment? Can I make a comment?
Go ahead, Director Hinton.
Sorry, this is an item that, thank you so much. I feel like I want to take some responsibility for people paying attention to this item. I know that I've tried to bring it out over the last few months to note that, this is a part of a larger crisis. This isn't about Oakland's incompetence in any kind of way, but a teacher crisis across the nation. And I think that the one thing that always is important is, like, how do we track these teachers and how do we support them, because they are on emergency credentials and they should actually be really celebrated. And the other piece is that I want to note that in the same way that we push back on charter schools that have the similar kind of issues around credentialing and that type of thing, that it's in these moments when we are actually on par, and we should be actually supporting one another to make sure that we have a strong teaching force across Oakland, no matter the delivery system of schools. And with that, I just appreciate that, like, that as the superintendent and others look at this, that the list is getting shorter, and that we can see where it is that we need, Spanish or special ed, and so that I know that HR is working to kind of recruit in those particular areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Hinton-Hodge. Mr. Rakestraw, can we have a roll call at this time?
Yes. On the roll call for T.-7, Director Gonzalez,
Yes.
Director Harris, Director Hinton-Hodge,
Abstain.
Director Yee,
Yes.
Director Torres,
Yes.
Vice President London,
Yes.
President Ng.
Yes.
Motion's adopted.
Thank you. All right, so our earlier public comment on non-agenda items did get disrupted, so we will take comments on item U, which is public comments on non-agenda items. If you're here to speak on this item, you have 1 minute and can speak at this time. Go ahead.
This is very disrespectful to the process, very disrespectful to the Brown Act. I can't believe I come to the meeting and I see police here. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I seen the video. The people weren't right to rush the stage. I tried to speak to the people. I tried to let them know that we can't do nothing physical or try to be aggressive towards you. I said what I said in the last meeting, to vote your asses out. And that's what we need to do. We need to get you people the hell up out of here, because this ain't cool, man. This is not cool. You're disrespecting the process. You're disrespecting the Brown Act. You're just sitting up here doing what the hell you want to. And our children are the ones that are getting fucked over by you people.
Next speaker, please. If we could please refrain from using profanity, that would be preferable. Next speaker, please.
Eric Pettengill, Oakland parent, Oakland teacher, Oakland resident. I'm not even sure where to begin. When I came to tonight's board meeting, as I've come to many of these board meetings, as I've been, again, one of the few people in the room at the end of the night at these board meetings, along with yourselves, when I came tonight, I didn't expect to get shoved by the chief of the OUSD Police Department for no reason. I didn't rush the stage. I was standing. And while other people were rushing the stage, the chief of police the OUSD chief of police decided to come up and shove me out of the way. And while he did that, I told him he needed to stop shoving me and to take care of the parent who was on the ground, whose leg was trapped in one of these barriers, while cops were lifting up that barrier while his leg was trapped in it. So that's my first comment. My additional comments are that this board is just untrustworthy. Time and again, we've seen you sit up there and do nothing. In particular, Director Hodge, Director London, Director Harris, who've been here for years. Director Yee, who very much knows how these systems work. And you continue to greenlight this mismanagement.
You're over your time now. Next speaker, please.
Love life. I have been going to the Alameda County School Board meetings, and Epic Chartered School, which I have to give you credit for voting to close it. And at the time when you closed it, you probably didn't know that the building is sitting on a toxic tank that has been emitting toxic vapors. And what I told you this before, what was so insulting at the meeting, the parents had been encouraged by the charter school administration to beg to have their children go back into the building. And because of one board member's push to say it wasn't appropriate, they didn't allow it. And something is wrong with the charter school system when you will allow children and staff to sit in a building that is unsafe and unhealthy because you just want to keep the school open. So thank you for closing Epic Charter School on your part, but we still have a problem with a lot of other issues, and I hope you can start correcting many other issues besides that Epic Charter School that you voted to close.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Seeing none, we're moving on to the next item, item V. Is there a motion to adopt the People Discipline Consent Report?
So moved.
Moved by Vice President London and seconded by Director Gonzalez. Can we have a roll call on this item? Do we have to do public comments? Okay. Is there a public comment on the People Discipline Consent Report? Seeing none, Mr. Rickshaw, can we have a roll call, please?
Okay, so on the adoption of the pending motion, Director Hinton Hodge?
Yes.
Director Harris? Yes. Director Yee?
Yes.
Director Gonzalez?
Yes.
Director Torres?
Yes.
Vice President London? Yes. President Ng?
Yes.
The motion is adopted.
Thank you. Regular board member reports. Are there any reports? Director Gonzalez.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some upcoming opportunities for District 6 families or staff. We are kicking off, I think every district is going to be having a community engagement meeting about Cohort 3 of the Blueprint. In District 6, our meeting is going to be on November 4th. It's going to be at the Lockwood campus at 6 p.m. everyone's welcome, but we're going to be talking about District 6 specific challenges. And I also just want to share, we're going to start a study group in my district. We're inviting parents and teachers, and we're going to meet over November and December, so that people have a chance to really engage in a deep way and study the issues, the challenges that we're facing with our elementary schools in District 6, and then make proposals that will, make recommendations to the board. And so just wanted to put out there, come on November 4th, or let me know if you want to be part of that study group if you can't be there on November 4th. I am eager to, engage and have the conversations that folks are wanting to have. November 5th is the next Budget and Finance Committee, Joint Audit Committee. We're going to be talking about the budget development process. We talked a little bit about that tonight, including the plan for budget reduction. So this is a good time to learn more. It's going to be at 6:30 here at Met West on November 5th. And then on December 5th, so that's on November 5th. On December 5th, we're going to be doing a budget engagement meeting in District 6, and budget staff will be there. And that's going to be at Burkhalter at 6 p.m. So folks are welcome. Anyone's welcome. It's specifically, I'll be targeting District 6 constituents, but anyone is welcome to attend. And then finally, I just wanted to say that, this blueprint stuff is really, really hard. It's really hard on people. And I really wanted to acknowledge principals who are just doing really hard work to lead their communities. So I wanted to just say thank you and acknowledge Michael Ray at Frick, acknowledge Amapola Obrera at Oakland Soul, Dennis Gaikama at Kaiser Sankofa, Brianne Zika at MLA, Shelly Hawkins McCrae at Futures, Killian Betlatch at Elmhurst, Amy Carroza and her team, Amy Boyle and Fabiana Almada at CCPA, and I know I'm leaving off other schools. I don't know who's leading Met West right now, unfortunately. But I just wanted to just really acknowledge that this is really, really hard. It's really, really hard. And it's hard on everybody. It's hard on our families. It's hard on our staff. But I know that our principals are just holding a lot right now, and I just want to acknowledge it and thank them publicly for that. So thanks.
Thank you, Director Gonzalez. Director Yee.
Thank you, and thank you for that acknowledgement, Director Gonzalez. It was great to walk through all those schools with you. I wanted to express my condolences, and I'm sure the board's condolences, on the passing of two really fine Oakland educators. One, Rosita Young, who was a longtime Lincoln School elementary teacher who became an elementary science educator in Oakland and trained and prepared and supported many elementary teachers in science. She passed away about a month ago. And the second was Mr. Dan Fleming, born in Oakland in 1946, the year I was born, and served at primarily at the John Sweat School and helped make it a K-8. He was distinguished by working his way up through to finally get his advanced degree in astrophysics at UC Berkeley, and he chose to come back to teaching. And he actually, one of the greatest stories is when John Sweat became a K-8, he taught all the English and all the math and all the science classes for the middle school that was set up there. And he was quite a wonderful person who passed away last week. And for those who know him, his memorial service is listed in the Sunday's Chronicle in the legacy section. So just as Director Gonzalez mentioned, the people who are working here, we also stand on the shoulders of really great and fine teachers who have served us very, very well.
Thank you, Director Yee. Director Torres.
It's late. Everybody get home safe, but let's just say congrats to our president. She's about to have a baby. Woo! See you on the other side.
Thank you, Director Torres. Any other comments by board members? All right.
I do.
Director Hinhaj?
I do. Hi. It is with just heavy heart and extreme sadness, and wanting to acknowledge and recognize the life and the work of Rachel Henry Willis Henry, who is a the Oakland native, a OUSD student, graduate of Cremont, I believe, and has just been a fierce warrior for children in this district to be educated well. Obviously, starting with her own children, who was in elementary school and middle school. She passed away today, and it was sudden and not known. She was doing the work this weekend in community. She worked for the Charter School Association. She worked on helping to build new schools like Aram Prep. I believe she's been a part of Lighthouse community. And I know that she also most recently began doing work around organizing charter school parents, and then also working with Reach Families as director of organizing. And it is just with a heavy heart, and just we'll miss her, and pray for her family, and just know that as we do these battles, sometimes whose voices we don't often hear, and who don't often have the privilege and the benefit of having their children educated. Rachel was that warrior queen who did that work on behalf of all children, but in particular Black and brown babies of our district. And so she'll be sorely missed. And I just ask that people acknowledge the work of parent organizers in that vein.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. Amen. Ashe.
All right, thank you. Any other board member reports? Seeing none. Introduction of new legislative matters. Does not appear to be any. This meeting is now adjourned.
Good night.